She was a single mother expecting her third child.
She was real happy. She was already making plans.
She was able to acquire the new home.
And this time, she knew she'd found the right partner.
He cared for her son.
He was an upstanding pillar of the community.
Any problems or needs, he's the guy.
But then 3 gunshots leave her clinging to life.
She was very gravely injured.
There was hope that she could push through.
You hear me?
It has all the markings of a hate crime.
The letters KKK was spray painted in multiple places.
This is certainly a targeted attack.
Until detectives uncover a shocking motive for murder.
It didn't make sense.
Something so violent doesn't sit right.
Whoever did this was trying to create confusion.
October 13th, 2020. It's just after midnight in Chicago, Illinois, a Midwest metropolis of nearly 10 million.
The city certainly is rich in history, from its architecture to its location. It has the lake, it has skyscrapers.
Even though Chicago is a world-class city, you can very clearly at times see the racial and economical divide of the city.
The reality is there is a lot of crime that happens here in Chicago.
In response, the city has turned to what's known as ShotSpotter.
ShotSpotter technology is an acoustic, sound-driven device that alerts police before a 911 call can even be placed.
Once shots are reported, Chicago police act based on the information that they receive.
It's always listening, always ready the moment trouble arises. And at 12:06 a.m., the ShotSpotter system alerts dispatch of several gunshots in the Jeffrey Manor neighborhood.
Jeffrey Manor is a community on the south side of Chicago off of 95th Street. It's a quiet community.
There's relatively not a lot of crime.
1064, officer response needed to the area of 95th Street. ShotSpotter alert.
10-4, badge 2366 en route.
First responders immediately rush to the scene.
When they arrived, there was a female laying face down outside of a residence.
She had been shot and was fighting for her life.
We still got a pulse.
And it's not just her life on the line.
This woman is maybe 8 months pregnant.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
But as long as she is breathing, there's hope that she and her unborn baby can survive.
Need medical, multiple gunshot wounds.
Number one duty of the police officer is to render aid.
Stay with me now. Can you tell me your name?
She is still conscious enough to give the police her name.
Stacy.
35-year-old Stacy Jones was a single mother of 2 boys when she first moved to Chicago from Tennessee.
She wanted a better life for her children.
She had goals, and she just wanted the best for everybody.
She found a home in the Jeffrey Manor community, which was a big positive for her. She had gotten exactly what she needed in order to raise her small family.
Chicago also came with a built-in support network.
Her mother's family was from Chicago.
They all helped out because they were so close.
Hey, cut over here? Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Transitioning from Tennessee to a big city like Chicago, community and relationships are going to be important.
The big move also came with more financial stability.
Stacy Jones was a probation officer.
She had been part of the law enforcement family for many, many years.
Prior to her move, she accepted a position with Cook County.
Probation officers paid a little bit more here than in Tennessee. That's why she went to Chicago.
Once settled, Stacy made sure her sons thrived in the Windy City.
She was a good mother to both of them. She put out 100%. And when they got older, she had them in football, baseball, and karate, so she kept them busy.
Hey, Mom, how's it going?
And through her son's time on the football team, Stacy found some excitement of her own.
Your son, he's a natural. Does he practice at home with Dad?
Nah, he ain't around.
Her son's coach was 39-year-old Corey Deering, a pillar of the community.
He was well known in the neighborhood for his longtime volunteer work with kids, as well as his career with the Parks Department.
He helped her son develop his skills in football, and he seemed to have enjoyed playing the sport.
And with each practice, Stacy found herself more and more drawn to him.
There's a level of trust that she developed with Deering because he cared for her son.
But I see how good you are with these kids, though.
Yeah, these kids, they bring me joy.
This was someone that she began to like.
For Corey, the attraction was mutual.
At some point, their relationship became close, and they began a romantic relationship.
They quickly fell in love.
Within months of meeting, Stacy got a happy surprise when she found out she was expecting a new baby.
And when she learned it was going to be another boy, she was even more excited.
Over the next several months, Stacy wasted no time getting prepared for her new arrival.
She was real happy. She was already making plans. She was ready for it.
But now, just a month before her baby is due, police have discovered Stacy lying outside of her home after the Chicago ShotSpotter system detected gunshots in the area.
She was very gravely injured. She sustained 3 gunshot wounds to the back.
Can you hear me?
But she was still breathing.
There was hope that she could push through this.
But it's also what's around Stacy's body that officers find particularly alarming.
There's fresh graffiti at the scene.
The letters KKK was spray painted in multiple places on the home.
35-year-old Stacy Jones was excited to welcome a new baby into her growing family with Coach Corey Deering.
She had found out that it was a boy, so it wasn't like she didn't have experience raising these little boys.
She was happy. She made me proud. And was going to be a good mother of 3.
But now, just a month from her due date, Chicago police have found Stacy shot multiple times outside her home and racial slurs spray painted on the outside of her house.
When you have something so violent happen to a woman 8 months pregnant, it just doesn't sit right.
But she was alive.
We still got a pulse.
While paramedics begin to work on Stacy, responding officers clear the house.
They make a terrible discovery inside.
Her 11 and 7-year-old sons were in the house when their mother's gunned down on the porch.
Thankfully, they were unharmed, and both were asleep during the incident.
To be one moment sleeping soundly in your bed, to be awakened by sirens, I can't even imagine what those children were going through.
The officers contact one of Stacy's cousins to come pick up the children, while paramedics transport Stacy to the hospital.
As they're preparing for the ambulance, though, something falls from her pajamas.
It was a 9mm pistol.
We have a woman with a weapon in her waistband.
This certainly raised suspicion that Stacy Jones expected that something was going to happen.
Could that also mean she knew the attacker?
As EMTs rush Stacy to the hospital, major crimes detectives arrive and begin examining the scene.
What do we have, officer?
Stacy had been found shot in the back and was lying on her side, so it's apparent she turned away from her attacker.
So it would indicate to me one of 2 things. One, that she was either retreating in an urgent manner just to get away, or that she had completely let her guard down.
Detectives discover 3 shell casings by the door, as well as a small pool of blood.
Which means this is likely where the shooting occurred.
There's also derogatory graffiti plastered around the scene.
There's a racial slur.
Police immediately began their investigation, wondering whether or not a hate crime was involved.
But given the nature of the neighborhood, detectives are skeptical.
The neighborhood is predominantly African American and Hispanic.
It's a tight-knit community, so most of the people that stay in Jeffrey Manor know the ins and outs of Jeffrey Manor.
It's known as the Jeffrey Manor Maze. It'd be very difficult to do like a drive-by shooting per se.
This is not typically an area where white supremacists or racists would ply their trade, as it were.
Those sorts of racial tensions usually occur in areas where minorities are new arrivals rather than established residents.
It didn't make sense.
So it's clear that whoever did this was trying to initially throw the police off or kind of create confusion into the scene.
Still, the fact that Stacy took the time to get her own gun seems to indicate she was expecting trouble.
This is certainly a targeted attack.
But even though she had a weapon, Stacy had been shot in the back.
That suggests, obviously, somebody would have been retreating from a threat.
Was it immediately confrontational, or was it a conversation? Did her guard get let down?
When the detectives run Stacy's name, they realize that she may have had an extra reason to be wary of late-night visitors.
They find out that she's a probation officer.
Naturally, you want to think, does someone have angst against her directly based on her profession?
She's part of the law enforcement family, and everybody that puts on that badge understands that keep an eye out for yourself.
Maybe the shooter was a convicted felon out on probation, or the relative of an inmate whose probation had been revoked.
Hoping someone might have witnessed something, detectives canvass Stacy's neighbors.
Most homes these days use some sort of Ring camera or a camera that records the outside of what's going on.
We'd like to ask you some questions about the shooting that happened across the street.
Honestly, I ain't hear nothing. I was asleep.
Well, I noticed you do have a security camera.
Do you mind sharing that footage with us?
Yeah, no problem.
Great. Here's our card. Go ahead and send it to us on that email address right there. All right, thank you, sir.
When Stacy's cousin arrives to pick up the boys, she also agrees to speak with detectives.
That's the first line of inquiry. Who would want to harm this person? That they would have the nerve to come to her residence and gun her down.
Are you aware if Stacy had any enemies?
No. She was very well loved by everybody.
Her cousin doesn't know of anybody who would want to harm Stacy.
What about the father of her baby?
Obviously, people were aware she was 8 months pregnant.
To be honest, she never told me the name of her baby's father.
She was very private for, as it turns out, maybe some obvious reasons.
But I do know that he was married, though.
Stacy Jones's cousin has just told detectives investigating the shooting that left the young mother of 2 fighting for her life that she believes Stacy was dating a married man.
Could that have something to do with the shooting?
She was potentially breaking up a family, right?
I wish I knew more. Sorry.
Thanks. We're gonna head to the hospital.
We'll let you know if we have more questions, okay?
Unfortunately, Stacy won't be able to provide the detectives with any more information either.
When the detectives arrived at the hospital, they were greeted with bittersweet news.
The good part about it was they were able to deliver the baby alive.
He was delivered in critical condition.
My grandson, they're transferring him now. But it's bad.
There, he could receive proper neonatal care in the hopes that he could survive.
However, the doctors are unable to save his mother's life.
Stacy. They said there was nothing they could do.
Unfortunately, the injury was just too severe. She didn't survive.
Stacy's family is devastated by the outcome.
When I found out, I started crying. It was hard.
You lose a loved one, someone that is that person that you lean on and depend on, then all of a sudden it abruptly ends. It's unfair, it's not right.
After giving Stacy's mother a moment to compose herself, detectives ask if she'd be willing to answer a few more questions.
We want to know about the domestic relationships.
The sooner interviews take place, the more critical the responses.
Detectives start by asking if she can think of anyone who might have wanted to hurt Stacy.
No, no one. It doesn't make any sense.
She was a loving person. Not just me and the mother and children, to everybody.
To think somebody would be able to do this to a very visibly third trimester, not just woman, but a human being, was almost unimaginable.
Her mother is also unaware of any issues at Stacy's work.
No, she works so hard for those people.
She was dedicated to where she worked. She had a criminal justice degree. She had a master's degree, forensic, and she was going on to get a doctorate in forensic science.
Her hard work made her well-loved by co-workers as well as clients.
Stacy chose a career where she's a probationary officer, and most people would think that that's a dangerous job, and it can be at times, but oftentimes probation officers will begin to, in some ways, develop a relationship, trying to make sure that they see the best for that individual so that they don't have to see them again.
Detectives then move on to the topic of the father of Stacy's baby.
Obviously, people were aware she was pregnant, but she was very private about who the father was.
In fact, the family didn't even know his name.
After wrapping up with Stacy's mother, detectives head back to the station where they learn the footage from Stacy's neighbor has come in.
It was grainy at first, but it really created a clear-cut picture about what happened that night.
The video reveals a silver SUV approaching Stacy's house and then driving slowly past.
More importantly, they were able to get the license plate.
A moment later, a man enters the frame.
Although they could not see the face of the individual, one of the things that they saw was a sweatshirt with a very distinctive symbol on it.
He seemed suspicious as he approaches Stacy's house, shining a flashlight into the windows.
After the man knocks on the door, detectives watch as Stacy peers out one of the windows.
She obviously recognizes him and opens her door.
The two of them have a brief conversation outside.
Then she turned her back to go back into the home when she was shot.
He took the time to spray KKK at the scene.
At that point, the man runs.
But it's clear that Stacy never reaches for her own weapon.
There's no evidence to show that she felt so uncomfortable that she wanted to retrieve it. Matter of fact, she was so comfortable that she turned her back on the attacker because she didn't feel like her life was in danger.
But it's still not clear if the man was the father of her baby or just an angry parolee. It could have been anyone.
Hoping to learn more, detectives head to the probation office where Stacy worked.
They're greeted by one of Stacy's co-workers. And she says she's willing to talk to them.
Do you have a few minutes to speak to us about Stacy?
Oh, of course. Anything I can do to help.
Detectives start by asking her coworker if she knows of any parolees that Stacy might have had issues with.
They'd asked if maybe it was someone that she'd sent back to jail, or maybe a family member of someone.
No, not Stacy. I mean, Stacy got along with everyone. And I'm pretty sure that if there was an issue or a problem, she would let me know.
That's when the police learned that the coworker was also one of Stacy's closest friends.
Do you know anything about the father of her child? Anything you can tell us?
Actually, yes.
She was able to shed even more light on the person that she was pregnant with.
And I do know that his first name was Corey.
She knew his name was Corey. She wasn't aware of his last name.
He was Stacy's son's football coach.
But she also knew that the situation with Corey wasn't as rosy as one might think.
Stacy had recently hinted that they were having trouble.
She told law enforcement that he was unhappy with the pregnancy.
As a matter of fact, he told her to get an abortion.
Detectives investigating the murder of Stacy Jones have just learned that the father of her child was less than thrilled about her pregnancy.
There's that opportunity of him being found out by his wife in particular. That certainly is, unfortunately, motives that we've seen in the past.
Detectives ask Stacy's coworker about Stacy and Corey's dating history.
She said that Stacy and Coach Corey had started to date at the beginning of the year, and she was pregnant within a few months.
She said that Corey said that he was afraid of how the baby was going to affect his marriage.
He was pressuring her to have an abortion.
But Stacy refused, and eventually she and Corey broke things off.
The coworker said that Stacy thought that would be the end of it.
She's already a single mother. She's raising 2 boys, and she's got a job. Even if the father wasn't going to be involved, she appeared to be very confident that her baby was going to be just fine.
And then it got really ugly. He began to threaten her.
The further that Stacy got along in her pregnancy, the more upset he got and the more threats Stacy began to receive.
And there was one threat that stood out in particular.
Corey told Stacy that she would never make it to the end of the pregnancy.
It was obvious that she was afraid, even though she tried to hide it.
As time went on, she appeared to let her guard down, almost as if to say, well, I'm nearing the end, so maybe the threat has been alleviated.
She says Stacy had become confident enough to go on the offensive herself.
She started an investigation into Corey and into his background in the efforts to be able to collect child support.
She wanted him to take some financial responsibility.
Now, was Corey aware that she was going to file child support?
I'm not sure.
This was turning out to not only be a threat to his marriage, but his finances as well, which could be a huge motivating factor.
But was that enough to push him to murder? Back at the station, detectives look into Corey, starting with his last name.
That's presumably not going to be that hard to find the coach of the youth football team.
And sure enough, they quickly get a hit. 39-year-old Corey Deering.
Not only is he a football coach, he actually works for the park district. There's an office there at the local park. He is the person that's called on by people who frequent the park. Any problems or needs that they have, he's the guy.
Corey had been in the district for more than a decade.
He was a trusted and respected member of the community.
He had no criminal background.
But just because Corey doesn't have a rap sheet doesn't mean he hasn't dealt with legal trouble.
As the police began to do a deeper dive, they find out that Corey has other court cases pending against him. And for not 1, not 2, but 5 other custody and child support cases from 5 different women.
Stacy's not the only woman that's out here that is in this relationship with this married man. What's going on with this brother?
It's clear that Corey is no stranger to the situation he was in with Stacy.
So this caused the police to think that if he's had 5 other custody cases and paternity cases pending, why Stacy? Why now?
It's something police want to ask Corey himself.
They went over to the park district building in order to speak to Corey.
We'd like to ask you some questions about Stacy Jones.
Right at the start of the conversation, Corey confirms he's known Stacy since the previous summer and that her son plays on his youth football team.
When they pressed him on the depths of his relationship with Stacy, he was very upfront.
He openly admitted that him and Stacy had been in a relationship and that the relationship had started fairly quickly after she had moved to Chicago.
Beyond that, Mr. Deering also told police that he knew she was pregnant.
Yeah, I'm also pretty sure I'm the father.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, it's not ideal, right?
He said that he respected the fact that Stacy decided to keep the baby.
He had no plans to be involved in the child's life, but he had no issue with Stacy Jones.
I mean, this isn't the first time I've been in a situation like this, you know?
Corey tells detectives that he and Stacy did break things off, but remained cordial.
But he also told police he hadn't spoken to Stacy since July.
At that point, detectives reveal that Stacy is dead, and her newborn son is in critical condition.
But he was just taken aback that he would at all be a suspect because, as he told the police, he had not talked to her in months.
So detectives asked Corey where he was the night of the shooting.
He says he was home with his wife and his son, just doing some stuff in the garage.
His hobby was fitness, and he worked out a lot.
I was in the garage working out, and my son was there for a while. He eventually went inside.
He said his family could confirm his alibi.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Detectives are still suspicious of Corey, but since they don't have anything to bring him in on, they're forced to leave.
But they promise they'll be in touch.
After talking to Corey, the detectives subpoena his phone records.
They also learned that the trace on the SUV's license plate had come back.
And much to their surprise, the license plate does not actually come back to Corey Deering.
The owner of the car was a person by the name of Alicia Wyatt.
Chicago detectives have just learned that the SUV caught on security video the night of Stacy Jones's murder is registered to a woman named Alicia Wyatt.
The police are stunned. Who is Alicia Wyatt? Given the nature of Stacy's job, is she someone that was a client, a parolee?
Or was she related to someone who was?
While police are dispatched to find Alicia Wyatt,
Got the records?
detectives dig deeper into Stacy's case files.
They don't find any parolees with the last name Wyatt, or anyone listing her as a contact.
So now the police are really trying to figure out how these two women are connected.
Detectives also reach back out to Stacy's coworker, who says the name doesn't sound familiar.
The only option detectives have at this point was to follow up on Corey's alibi.
Police went to speak to Corey's wife.
Do you know a woman named Stacy Jones?
Who? Corey's wife immediately denies any knowledge of anyone named Stacy Jones.
No, but I wouldn't be surprised whoever she is if she's pregnant.
Why do you say that?
Whether she wasn't familiar with Stacy, but she still knew that her man was cheating on her.
Because according to her, this isn't the first time it's happened.
She knew this guy had multiple women. She even told him, like, I'm familiar with this lifestyle that he has. So was it love? Was the financial gain? What was it that was keeping her there with Corey?
Do you think Corey's capable of murder?
Corey? No. He's never been violent with anyone else that I know of.
He had other children with women who were not his wife. There was no evidence they ever attempted to harm those women, attempted to threaten them so that they would not have these children. So it is curious as to why Stacy Jones having his child would be the trigger for him.
Corey's wife also confirms his alibi.
She indicated to them that on the night of the shooting, he had been at home in the garage, both working on a vehicle and also working out. This was something that Corey did on a daily basis.
And our son was out there most of the evening with him.
According to Corey's wife, their son came back inside and got ready for bed around 10:30.
She said she went to bed around then as well, but the garage light was still on.
Do you mind if we see this garage?
Sure. This way.
Before leaving, detectives take a look around the garage.
As expected, there's a home gym and a workshop area.
But that's not all detectives find.
Upon searching the garage, they found cans of white spray paint.
Given the graffiti at the crime scene, this grabbed detectives' attention.
This stuff belonged to Corey?
Actually, all that paint is mine. I use it for screen printing.
Corey Deering's wife told him that she used the spray paint in order to do screen printing of T-shirts, and that Corey would help her with that from time to time.
So was it the same paint or just a coincidence?
Detectives wrap up at Corey's house. But when they return to the station, it's to sad news.
Homicide.
Stacy's baby didn't make it.
The young boy did survive for only 4 days.
He was on the life reserve, but they told him even if he lived, he'd never be no good. So they made the decision to take him off life preserve. It was rough.
The baby succumbed to the injuries, not from the shooting, but from the lack of oxygen received because of the condition of its mother when its mother was killed.
So now, as far as from the police standpoint, it's become a double homicide investigation.
But was Corey the killer?
Detectives get some more insight when they finally receive his cell phone records.
It's not about what they find, but what they don't find.
There's no activity on the phone between 10:30 p.m. and 1 a.m., which would have been around the time of Stacy's murder.
Usually when you have cell phones, they're able to ping off of different cell towers to kind of outline where you are in the area, or even to show that the phone was in use. What stood out to the police in this moment was that there was no activity whatsoever.
But at 1 a.m., he suddenly places a single phone call.
He placed a call to Alicia Wyatt.
We got him.
Detectives investigating the murders of Stacy Jones and her newborn child have just uncovered tangible evidence connecting her ex-boyfriend, 39-year-old Corey Deering, to the shooting.
On the night of the shooting, Corey Deering had called Alicia Wyatt.
Alicia was the owner of the SUV seen riding past Stacy's house before the shooting.
And when the detectives finally sit down with Alicia, they learn that the phone call isn't the only thing connecting her to Corey.
She's currently pregnant by Corey as well.
Convinced that Alicia must know something about Stacy's murder, they press her to tell them what happened that night.
It doesn't take long for her to fold.
It's true, Corey did call me that night.
According to Alicia Wyatt, on the night of the shooting, Corey Deering had asked her to come pick him up from the alley outside of his home, where he was working out.
Give me your phone.
What for?
Does it matter?
Corey took her cell phone as well as his own and left it in the area of where his home was.
He was aware of cell phone triangulations, so he did not take these cell phones to the vicinity of the crime that he obviously had premeditated.
Then Alicia says Corey instructed her to drive to a neighborhood she'd never been to.
Alicia doesn't ask a lot of questions. This is her man. She trusts him.
According to Alicia, at some point, Corey told her to stop, and he got out of the vehicle.
Just wait right here.
Corey goes around the corner. She's not privy to see what has happened, but what she can say has happened is that during his absence, she's heard gunshots ring out.
And then he came back a few minutes later out of breath. What happened?
Drive up the block.
He instructed her to drive to a different area where he got out of the car again and finally came back to the car the second time, panting and sweating.
When he returned to the vehicle, He was very stoic.
Shortly thereafter, they leave the scene.
Alicia says she dropped him off. He gave her back her phone and then called her a bit later after she returned home.
Then I heard about the murder on the news and I recognized the house and I didn't know what to do.
Alicia suspected that Corey was involved in something, although she never asked him what he did, and she never actually saw him do anything. She was afraid for her own safety.
And you didn't know what his plans were?
No, I swear I had no clue what he was doing.
Ultimately, detectives believe her. They think she really had no idea what Corey was going to do.
So they let her go.
Her statements were very consistent with what was known at the time. She was, police believe, a pawn.
But her statement is enough to get an arrest warrant for Corey.
Corey was charged with at least 2 counts of first-degree murder, both for Stacey Jones and for the child that was born and lived for 4 days.
Once he's arrested, Corey refuses to speak to police.
But Corey's lack of cooperation hardly matters once detectives are able to confiscate his phone.
Apparently, Corey liked to record his workouts, even one from the night of the murder.
During the recording of the workout, he had on a certain sweatshirt that had a certain distinct marking on it, consistent with the distinct marking that they saw on the individual who shot Stacey Jones.
I guess the idea is to show that he's, hey, I'm at my garage working and nowhere near the crime scene, but you forgot to take off a very descriptive sweatshirt.
And on June 6, 2023, the case goes to trial.
On the one side, you have the prosecution who has said that, yes, this man was a philanderer. Yes, he stepped outside of his marriage. But this baby was one baby too many.
Why don't you just come out and talk to me?
Listen, I've already told you, there's nothing you can say that's going to convince me to change my mind.
What about me? What about my family?
What about me? What about this baby?
And as soon as Stacey turned her back, Corey carried out his plan.
Corey refused to let Stacey see the end of her pregnancy.
The evidence in the case was overwhelming in terms of the diabolical nature of what Corey did. From the concealing of the cell phones and leaving those behind, to the spray painting outside of the home with an attempt to mislead police.
When you put all of those pieces together, it's a smoking gun.
In response, Corey's defense points the finger back at Alicia Wyatt.
In a jury trial, the defense team is hoping to create any type of reasonable doubt.
His lawyer proceeded with a theory that Alicia was motivated to kill Stacey Jones because she was also impregnated by Corey Deering.
But the jury doesn't buy it.
Fortunately for Stacey's family, the prosecution has met its burden and the state has proven his case. And he is convicted of not 1, but 2 murders.
Once Corey was found guilty of both of those murder counts, the court had no choice but to sentence him to natural life in prison. That is a mandatory sentence in the state of Illinois when there is more than 1 person killed in an incident.
Even though Corey will spend the rest of his life behind bars, Stacey's family feels a lingering frustration that Alicia will never face any legal consequences for her actions.
She drove him. She could have called the police. When she heard the shots, she could have called the police then. So honestly, I think she should be in jail too for accessory before and after the fact.
But no amount of punishment can replace the loss of a young mother who was doing her best to raise 2 good sons, with another one on the way.
There really isn't a win. Stacey's family will never be the same. I know nothing can ever bring her back. For the kids who are involved, to bring their mother back, no sense of justice, but I would hope that they would find their path of healing for themselves.
When you close your eyes and conjure an image of the island of Oahu, your mind inevitably gravitates toward the idyllic and the serene. You envision the endless stretches of pristine white sand, the gentle, rhythmic crashing of azure waves against the shoreline, and the warm, golden sunlight filtering through the vibrant green canopy of palm trees. It is a landscape that has been heavily romanticized for generations, universally recognized as a sanctuary where the burdens of ordinary life are meant to be washed away by the tranquil Pacific breeze. But those who truly know the island understand that this tropical paradise possesses a dual nature. There is another, far more intimidating side to Oahu, a side that reveals itself only when the skies darken and the atmospheric pressures shift. There are nights when the comforting trade winds mutate into violent, howling gusts, when the warm air violently collides with sudden winter storm fronts, and the heavens open up with a ferocious intensity that completely shatters the tranquil illusion of the islands. On these specific, ominous nights, the towering volcanic mountains transform into imposing, jagged silhouettes looming against a starless, suffocatingly black sky. The heavy, relentless tropical rain turns familiar, winding coastal and mountain roads into treacherous, rushing rivers. It is within this profound, disorienting darkness, beneath the relentless and deafening roar of a historic winter downpour, that the opening chapter of our story is violently written. The date is January 20th, 1982. The weather gripping Oahu on this particular evening cannot simply be described as inclement. It is bordering on apocalyptic. A massive and severe storm system has descended upon the Hawaiian archipelago, bringing with it a deluge of truly epic proportions. The rain is blinding, descending in heavy, relentless, horizontal sheets that rapidly overwhelm the island's drainage systems, causing widespread and dangerous flooding across numerous vital roadways. Visibility is reduced to absolute zero in many areas, turning the simple act of driving into a perilous gamble. It is the kind of night where sensible people immediately seek shelter, lock their doors, draw their curtains tight, and anxiously wait for the morning sun to eventually restore a sense of safety and order to their world. It is a night where the darkness feels thick, heavy, absolute, and deeply isolating. And tragically, it is the exact night that a young woman vanished without a trace into that very darkness, leaving behind a chilling physical puzzle that has haunted the local community, frustrated generations of the police department, and endlessly tortured her grieving family for more than 4 decades. To fully grasp the profound physical and psychological enigma of this case, we must first mentally travel to the precise scene where the immediate, terrifying aftermath of this disappearance was discovered. Imagine the grim morning after the great storm has finally passed. The violent rain has mercifully ceased, leaving behind a heavily sodden, waterlogged, and strangely quiet landscape. We find ourselves in the area of Maunawili, a lush, deeply verdant, and heavily forested region situated on the windward side of the island. Specifically, we are standing near the site of what was then known to locals as the Old Kailua Drive-In Theater. The road here winds tightly through thick, overhanging tropical foliage, bordered by steep, muddy embankments and dense, impenetrable vegetation. It is here, pulled haphazardly off to the side of this rain-slicked, isolated thoroughfare, that a vehicle sits completely abandoned. It is a 1976 Toyota. The car sits in utter silence, its engine long cold, resting awkwardly by the muddy edge of the asphalt as if its journey was interrupted by some sudden, inexplicable, and overwhelming force. But it is crucial to understand that it is not the mere presence of an abandoned automobile that chills the blood of those who find it. Vehicles experience mechanical failures and break down constantly, especially in the midst of severe, punishing weather conditions. Rather, it is the highly specific, deeply contradictory, and profoundly unsettling condition in which this particular Toyota is discovered that instantly transforms a mundane roadside breakdown into the terrifying genesis of a chilling true crime enigma. As investigators and frantic loved ones approach the silent vehicle, the bizarre and contradictory nature of the crime scene becomes immediately, glaringly apparent. The previous night, as we have thoroughly established, was characterized by a catastrophic, blinding rainstorm. The wind was whipping with fierce velocity. The rain was coming down with enough force to flood the island's robust infrastructure, and the temperatures had dropped. Yet, the driver's side window of this 1976 Toyota is completely rolled down. It is not merely cracked open an inch or two for ventilation. It is entirely lowered, fully exposing the interior cabin to the violent elements. Consequently, the inside of the car has been absolutely devastated by the storm. The relentless, driving rain has poured freely and uninterrupted into the vehicle throughout the night. The driver's seat is completely soaked through, acting like a massive sponge that has absorbed the full, unchecked fury of the midnight tempest. The floorboards are entirely submerged in muddy rainwater. When the door is finally opened, observers find an astonishing accumulation of roughly 5 to 7 centimeters of standing, murky water pooled stagnant at the bottom of the car. The vehicle is, for all intents and purposes, a miniature flooded terrain. Basic human logic and common sense dictate that if a driver were experiencing a sudden mechanical failure, or if they felt compelled to pull over to the side of a dark road due to terrifyingly poor visibility, their very first instinct, their most primal, basic reflex of self-preservation, would be to rapidly roll up the window to protect themselves and the interior of their car from the freezing, blinding rain. The open window makes absolutely no logical sense in the context of the severe weather conditions of that night. It strongly suggests an interruption so sudden, so forceful, so highly disorienting, or so inherently coercive that the driver's most basic instinct to shield themselves from the storm was completely bypassed or physically prevented. But the impossible contradictions of this eerie crime scene do not end with the rolled-down window and the deeply flooded floorboards. They only multiply and deepen, creating a labyrinth of confusion. As the authorities carefully examine the flooded, ruined interior of the Toyota, searching desperately for any indication of where the driver might have gone or what might have transpired, they make a discovery that utterly defies all reason. Resting inside the vehicle, sitting amidst the damp ruin and the encroaching water, is a woman's purse. It is the driver's personal handbag, the central, vital repository of her daily life. And it is completely, inexplicably dry. You must let that specific detail sink into your mind for a moment. The car is flooded with up to 7 centimeters of standing rainwater. The driver's seat is thoroughly and entirely drenched. The window was left wide open during one of the most violent, unrelenting storms of the entire year. Yet, this essential, highly personal item has somehow, miraculously, been spared from the deluge. The perfectly dry purse sits in the wet, ruined car like an impossible artifact, a glaring anomaly that immediately signals to the seasoned investigators on the scene that they are not dealing with a simple, tragic case of a stranded motorist who foolishly walked off into the dark to find a tow truck. The contents of that dry purse, or rather, what is specifically missing from inside of it, elevate the scene from merely strange to undeniably sinister. When the police look inside the dry bag, they realize that certain highly specific, targeted items have been deliberately removed. The driver's identification is entirely gone. The driver's license is nowhere to be found. Furthermore, the vehicle's registration papers, which are typically kept securely in the glove compartment or folded within the purse itself, have also vanished without a trace. These are not items of immense monetary value. A common roadside thief looking to score some quick cash in the dark would simply grab the entire purse and flee into the night, or perhaps hastily pull out the cash and run. But the money, the bag itself, and all the other mundane personal effects remain completely untouched. Only the specific documents that verify the legal identity of the driver and the official ownership of the vehicle have been meticulously extracted and taken away. Who takes only a driver's license and a car registration while leaving the entire purse behind in an abandoned, heavily flooded car? If the driver left the vehicle of her own free volition to desperately seek help in the blinding storm, why would she abandon her entire purse, containing her money and personal items, but take the precious time to fish out her identification and registration in the dark? Furthermore, if she was simply seeking temporary shelter from the relentless rain, where did she go, and why has she not contacted her frantic family, who are currently fraught with overwhelming panic, dialing her phone number over and over again with absolutely no response? These are the physical, tangible clues left behind in the mud and the standing water of Mount Awili. An open window in the middle of a raging monsoon. A deeply flooded floorboard. A perfectly dry handbag sitting amidst the ruin. Missing identification papers. These disparate, contradictory fragments form the chaotic, terrifying starting point of one of the most notorious, heartbreaking, and baffling cold cases in the entire history of Oahu. They are the silent, lingering echoes of a tragic and violent interruption. This car did not belong to a transient person passing through, nor did it belong to someone with dangerous enemies or a dark, highly secretive past. It belonged to a normal, 19-year-old girl. Her name was Lisa O. She was a young, vibrant, and incredibly friendly hairdresser from the town of Kailua. She was a beloved daughter, a deeply cherished friend, and a young woman with a steady boyfriend and a beautiful, unwritten future stretching out brightly before her. On the night of January 20th, 1982, she was simply trying to get home. She had spent the evening doing the most ordinary, relatable things imaginable, finishing a long shift at the salon where she worked, stopping to buy some poke for a late dinner, and spending quiet time with her boyfriend in his sister's apartment in Makiki. She eventually walked out into the rainy parking lot, said her goodbyes, and got into her car to make the familiar, routine drive back to her house. But Lisa O never made it home. She vanished into the torrential deluge, leaving behind a ghost ship of a car that asked 100 terrifying questions and provided absolutely no answers. 10 agonizing days later, the desperate island-wide search for Lisa O would reach a devastating, heart-shattering conclusion in a steep, overgrown ravine on Mount Tantalus, transforming a frantic missing persons investigation into a dark homicide case that has haunted the state of Hawaii ever since. For over 4 decades, seasoned investigators, tenacious journalists, and heartbroken citizens have pored over the bizarre details of that abandoned Toyota, trying to decipher the grim narrative hidden within the open window, the standing water, and the missing identification. Yet, despite the relentless passage of time, the truth remains tragically obscured, washed away by the relentless rain of that terrible January night. To understand the true weight of the tragedy that unfolded on that rain-soaked highway, we must consciously pull our attention away from the chilling remnants of the abandoned Toyota and redirect our focus entirely toward the vibrant, breathing life that existed just hours before the storm. The darkest true crime narratives often run the risk of reducing human beings to mere statistics or two-dimensional victims defined solely by the horrific circumstances of their final moments. But to comprehend the profound loss experienced by the island of Oahu in the winter of 1982, we must resurrect the memory of the young woman at the absolute center of this mystery. We must come to know her not as a missing person printed on a faded flyer, but as the bright, ambitious, and deeply loved individual she was. Her name was Lisa O, and at the time her life was violently interrupted, she was only 19 years old. 19 is a uniquely powerful age, existing precisely on the precarious threshold between the fading innocence of adolescence and the daunting, expansive responsibilities of full adulthood. It is an era of life typically characterized by boundless energy, evolving dreams, and the exciting, gradual crystallization of one's future identity. For Lisa, this transformative period was being lived out against the breathtaking backdrop of the windward side of Oahu, specifically within the close-knit, picturesque community of Kailua. To truly contextualize Lisa's daily existence, one must understand the distinct geographical and cultural atmosphere of Kailua in the early 1980s. Separated from the bustling, concrete density of Honolulu by the towering, jagged peaks of the Kola mountain range, Kailua has always maintained a distinctly different rhythm. It was, and in many ways remains, a place defined by its gentle trade winds, its sweeping, crescent-shaped beaches composed of fine, powdery white sand, and a pervasive, unmistakable sense of relaxed, neighborhood familiarity. In 1982, Kailua was a community where people genuinely knew their neighbors, where the pace of life was intentionally slower, and where a pervasive sense of island security allowed young people to navigate their world with an inherent, unshakable trust in their surroundings. It was not a place synonymous with random, violent crime or sudden, inexplicable disappearances. It was a safe haven, a vibrant suburban sanctuary where a young woman like Lisa could comfortably build a life, cultivate deep friendships, and look toward the horizon with genuine, unburdened optimism. She was thoroughly embedded in the fabric of this community, drawing her energy from the warm, supportive network of family and friends who called the windward side their home. Within this welcoming community, Lisa had already begun to carve out a definitive professional path for herself. Despite her youth, she possessed a clear sense of direction and a strong work ethic, finding employment as a hairdresser at a local establishment known as the Susan Beer Salon, situated right in the heart of Kailua. Working in a salon is a profession that requires much more than mere technical skill with scissors and styling tools. It demands a highly specific, deeply empathetic personality type. Hairdressers act as unofficial confidants, sounding boards, and daily therapists for their clients. They are required to be exceptional listeners, possessing the innate ability to make anyone who sits in their chair feel instantly comfortable, valued, and heard. The fact that Lisa chose and thrived in this particular vocation speaks volumes about her fundamental character. Those who knew her, worked alongside her, and sat in her salon chair consistently painted a portrait of a remarkably cheerful, warm, and inherently friendly young woman. She possessed a radiant, infectious positivity that effortlessly drew people toward her. She was not someone who blended into the background. Rather, she was a vibrant presence, a source of light and easy conversation in any room she entered. Her family and her wide circle of friends would later recount, with profound and enduring grief, how deeply she cared for the well-being of others. Lisa was the kind of person who actively nurtured her relationships, always remembering small details about people's lives and consistently going out of her way to offer a helping hand or a sympathetic ear. She was universally described as a young woman with a heart full of compassion and a mind brimming with plans for the future. She was not aimless. She had aspirations, goals she was actively working toward, and a deep-seated desire to build a meaningful, fulfilling life for herself on the island she loved. This profound capacity for empathy and her universally acknowledged kindness make the circumstances of her disappearance all the more agonizing. The idea that someone so gentle and so dedicated to bringing beauty and comfort to others could become the target of such an incomprehensible darkness is a juxtaposition that the human mind inherently struggles to reconcile. It amplifies the cruelty of the crime, highlighting the extinguishing of a genuinely bright, positive force in the community. Adding to the complete normalcy and the deeply relatable nature of Lisa's daily life was her romantic relationship. At the time of her disappearance, Lisa was happily dating a young man named Doug Holmes. Doug was navigating his own path toward adulthood, enrolled as a university student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Their relationship added another layer of ordinary, youthful stability to Lisa's world. They were simply a normal, young couple, navigating the beautiful complexities of early romance, balancing their respective work and academic schedules, and carving out precious time to spend together amidst the beautiful, distracting scenery of Oahu. Doug's presence in her life underscores the tragic banality of the days leading up to the incident. There were no highly dramatic, cinematic warning signs, no dark, looming shadows indicating that their lives were about to be irreparably shattered. They were doing what countless other young couples were doing across the island, building memories, sharing meals, and simply enjoying the comforting company of one another. To facilitate their time together, Lisa frequently navigated the geographical divide of the island. While her roots, her family, and her job were firmly planted in the tranquil environment of Kailua, Doug's academic life and his family connections occasionally drew them over the majestic Kulal Mountains toward the much denser, more urbanized southern side of the island. Specifically, they often spent time in Makiki, a residential neighborhood situated in the bustling, sprawling city of Honolulu. Makiki sits nestled in the lower slopes of the Punchbowl Crater and Mount Tantalus, a densely populated, vibrant area that sharply contrasts with the quiet, breezy expanses of Kailua. The journey between these two drastically different locations is a fundamental part of life for many Oahu residents, requiring a drive over the steep, winding mountain passes that connect the windward side to the island's bustling urban center. It is a drive that Lisa would have been incredibly familiar with, a routine journey traversing the island's dramatic topography. This geographical context is absolutely vital to understanding the spatial realities of the case that would soon unfold. The physical distance between the salon in Kailua, the apartment in Makiki, and the eventual, terrifying locations where evidence would later be discovered forms a complex, baffling triangle that investigators would struggle to map logically. But before the storm, before the abandoned car, and before the frantic searches, these locations were simply the mundane backdrop to a happy, perfectly normal life. Makiki was just a place to visit her boyfriend. Kailua was simply the place she called home. The roads connecting them were merely functional pathways, entirely devoid of the menacing, sinister weight they would eventually acquire in the wake of her disappearance. When we construct this detailed portrait of Lisa O, we are forced to confront the most chilling and universal aspect of this entire tragedy. There is absolutely nothing in her background, her personality, her social circle, or her daily routines that marks her as a likely victim of a violent crime. She was not involved in any illicit activities. She did not associate with dangerous individuals. She was not engaging in high-risk behaviors that might conceivably put her in harm's way. She was merely living the standard, beautiful, and utterly ordinary life of a 19-year-old girl in Hawaii. She went to work, she chatted with her clients, she loved her family, she spent time with her college boyfriend, and she looked forward to whatever the future held for her. This profound, undeniable normalcy is exactly what makes the events of January 20th so incredibly terrifying. It serves as a stark, uncompromising reminder that unimaginable darkness can spontaneously intersect with the most innocent, routine moments of our lives. It proves that a person can do absolutely everything right, live with kindness and joy, and still find themselves swallowed whole by an unfathomable nightmare simply by being in the wrong place on a dark, stormy night. Let us delve slightly deeper into the specific societal atmosphere of the era to fully appreciate the profound shockwaves this event would soon send through the community. The early 1980s in Hawaii represented a period of transition, yet it retained a strong, almost fiercely protective sense of island innocence. The mainland United States had already seen the rise of highly publicized, sensationalized crimes that bred a culture of intense paranoia, but the Hawaiian Islands, protected by thousands of miles of deep ocean, still felt like an impenetrable fortress against that kind of random, senseless malice. People routinely left their doors unlocked. Hitchhiking, while perhaps mildly discouraged by overly cautious parents, was still a relatively common and culturally accepted practice among the youth navigating the coastal highways. There was an unspoken, deeply ingrained social contract that people looked out for one another, especially local residents within their own tight-knit communities. When a young woman like Lisa, a recognizable face from the local salon, a girl whose family was integrated into the neighborhood fabric, was moving through her daily routine, she was surrounded by an invisible, assumed shield of communal safety. This inherent trust in the environment makes the geographic shift in her daily routine all the more significant. When she left the familiar, breezy streets of Kailua and traveled over the imposing mountain range into the dense, crowded residential blocks of Makiki to visit Doug, she was transitioning between two very different island realities. Makiki, with its closely packed apartment buildings, narrow streets, and proximity to the pulsating, anonymous energy of downtown Honolulu, offered a more urban, transient environment. Yet, even there, in the apartment belonging to Doug's sister, Lisa was within a safe, familiar domestic sphere. The stark, horrifying contrast between the comforting warmth of that familial apartment and the isolating, terrifying darkness of the rain-lashed roads she would later face is the psychological chasm at the very heart of this mystery. It highlights the terrifying fragility of human safety. One moment, a young woman is sitting comfortably indoors, sharing a meal of poke and enjoying the quiet company of a loved one. The next, she is plunged into an unpredictable, hostile environment where the established rules of her safe, predictable world abruptly cease to exist. By understanding the profound, gentle normalcy of Lisa O's life, her dedication to her craft, the warmth of her character, and the quiet joy of her relationship, we can truly begin to measure the catastrophic, unfathomable scale of the loss that occurred when the storm finally broke. It is this exact, heartbreaking juxtaposition, the radiant warmth of her 19 years of life abruptly colliding with the cold, absolute silence of her disappearance, that transforms her story from a mere police file into a lasting, painful scar on the collective memory of the island. The evening of January 20th, 1982, began just like any other Wednesday for 19-year-old Lisa O, completely devoid of any dark premonitions or unsettling omens that might have warned her of the impending tragedy. As the clock struck 9 that night, she finally wrapped up her long, demanding shift at the Susan Beer salon in the heart of Kailua, carefully sweeping up the cut hair, wiping down her styling station, and bidding a cheerful goodnight to her fellow hairdressers and the lingering clients. Outside the warmly lit windows of the salon, the atmosphere was already growing increasingly hostile, as the island of Oahu was steadily being swallowed by a massive, unyielding winter storm system that had rolled in from the dark expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The wind was beginning to howl through the palm trees with a violent, erratic energy, and the rain was falling in heavy, punishing sheets, quickly overwhelming the gutters and transforming the familiar streets of Kailua into shimmering, treacherous rivers of runoff. Despite the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions, Lisa remained undeterred, sticking to her meticulously planned schedule for the evening, which involved leaving the windward side of the island to visit her boyfriend, Doug Holmes. Before embarking on the daunting drive over the imposing Kulal mountain range, she made a brief, highly mundane stop to purchase some food for their dinner, specifically picking up some fresh poke, a beloved local Hawaiian staple, intending to share a quiet, cozy, and comforting meal indoors while the tempest raged outside. Clutching the bag of food, she climbed into her metallic 1976 Toyota, a reliable vehicle that she had driven countless times before, and started the engine, pulling out into the blinding rain to begin the treacherous journey toward the urban density of Honolulu. The drive from Kailua to the Makiki neighborhood, where Doug's sister lived and where the couple planned to spend the evening, typically required navigating the winding, elevated stretches of the Pali Highway. A route that would have been exceptionally perilous that night due to the torrential downpour, the zero visibility conditions, and the powerful, unpredictable gusts of wind violently buffeting the small car. Yet, demonstrating the resilience and confidence typical of a local resident accustomed to tropical weather, Lisa successfully navigated the hazardous mountain pass, safely descending into the sprawling, rain-soaked city and arriving at the Makiki apartment complex without any reported incidents or mechanical failures. Once safely inside the warm, brightly lit apartment, the terrifying reality of the storm outside temporarily faded into the background, replaced by the comforting, familiar intimacy of a standard date night. For the next several hours, Lisa and Doug existed in a safe, insulated bubble, eating the poke she had brought, talking about their days, and simply enjoying the relaxed, happy company of one another, completely oblivious to the fact that these quiet, domestic hours would become the subject of intense, agonizing scrutiny by homicide detectives for decades to come. The evening progressed smoothly and without any discernible conflict, tension, or unusual occurrences, stretching late into the night as the storm outside continued to aggressively pound against the windows of the apartment. It was not until shortly after midnight that Lisa finally decided it was time to end the evening and begin the long, solitary journey back over the dark mountains to her family home in Kailua. The couple left the warmth of the apartment and walked down together into the cold, rain-swept parking lot of the complex, a transition that marked the absolute final confirmed moments of Lisa's known existence. According to the statements Doug Holmes would later provide to desperate investigators and the press, they stood in the wet parking lot for a few moments, saying their final goodbyes amidst the deafening roar of the midnight downpour. He watched as she unlocked the door of her 1976 Toyota, slid into the driver's seat, and started the ignition, the headlights piercing through the heavy, driving rain to illuminate the slick asphalt ahead. As she pulled out of the parking space and drove away into the chaotic, stormy night, Doug retreated back to the safety of the apartment, entirely believing that his girlfriend was simply embarking on a routine, albeit highly unpleasant, drive home. That fleeting image of her taillights disappearing into the watery darkness is the precise moment where the factual, verifiable timeline of Lisa O's life abruptly ends and the terrifying, empty void of the mystery officially begins. The hours that immediately followed her departure remain a devastatingly blank slate, a terrifying black hole in the narrative where the unimaginable suddenly became a reality. We do not know the exact route she chose to take back to the windward side. We do not know if she encountered anyone on the flooded, deserted highways, and we absolutely do not know what forced her vehicle to a permanent halt on the muddy shoulder of Mount Awili. What we do know is that as the long, dark night slowly gave way to the gray, dismal morning of January 21st, the absolute worst nightmare of the O family was beginning to violently unfold. In the O household in Kailua, the morning broke with a chilling, immediate realization of absence, a suffocating silence that immediately triggered a primal, protective panic within her parents and loved ones. In an era long before the invention of cellular phones or digital location tracking, a missing person scenario immediately plunged families into a frantic, helpless information vacuum, forcing them to rely on landline telephones and sheer, desperate intuition. The family immediately began making frantic, terrified phone calls, desperately reaching out to anyone who might have seen her, hoping against all rational logic that she had simply decided to sleep over at a friend's house to avoid the dangerous driving conditions. Naturally, one of the very first and most urgent calls they placed was to Doug Holmes, hoping to hear that Lisa was still safe and sound in Makiki, perhaps waiting for the massive storm to fully pass before attempting the drive. But the moment Doug answered the phone and heard the sheer, unadulterated panic in the voices of Lisa's family, the horrifying reality of the situation instantly crystallized for everyone involved. He confirmed that she had indeed left his sister's apartment just after midnight, explicitly stating her intention to drive straight back to Kailua, meaning she had been missing, somewhere out in the unrelenting storm, for over 8 agonizing hours. The immediate shock of this revelation mobilized Doug into action, propelling him out of the apartment and into his own vehicle to retrace the route she would have taken, desperately hoping to find her stranded on the side of the highway with a flat tire or a flooded engine. Safe, but simply unable to communicate. He drove back over the treacherous mountain passes, his eyes anxiously scanning the wet, debris-strewn shoulders of the roads, praying for a glimpse of her familiar car, his heart undoubtedly pounding with a mixture of rising dread and desperate, clinging hope. It was during this frantic, solitary search effort that Doug Holmes made the discovery that would permanently alter the course of the investigation and shatter any lingering hopes of a simple, harmless misunderstanding. As he navigated the winding, heavily vegetated stretch of road in the Mount Awili area, situated geographically between the urban center of Honolulu and the suburban enclave of Kailua, he spotted something highly unnatural resting awkwardly near the site of the old Kailua Drive-In Theater. Pulled off onto the muddy, rain-slicked shoulder of the isolated road, looking entirely abandoned and deeply vulnerable against the backdrop of the dense tropical foliage, was Lisa's 1976 Toyota. He immediately pulled over and rushed toward the vehicle, his mind racing with terrifying possibilities. But as he reached the car and looked inside, the situation escalated from a simple missing person case to a deeply sinister, unfathomable crime scene. The driver's side window was completely rolled down, allowing the ferocious overnight storm to violently flood the interior cabin, soaking the seats and leaving inches of stagnant, murky rainwater pooled on the floorboards. A sight that made absolutely no logical sense for a driver seeking shelter from the elements. As he desperately searched the ruined interior for any sign of Lisa, any hastily scribbled note, or any clue as to her whereabouts, he noticed her personal purse sitting perfectly dry amidst the wreckage, a bizarre, impossible detail that immediately signaled that a violent, coercive interruption had occurred. The realization that she had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind her flooded car and her dry purse on a desolate, storm-ravaged highway, sent a shockwave of pure, unadulterated terror through Doug and the O family, triggering a massive, desperate, urgent local police response. The discovery of the abandoned and deeply flooded Toyota in the desolate, rain-swept area of Mount Awili instantly triggered one of the most extensive, desperate, and widely publicized civilian and police search operations ever recorded in the long and complex history of the Hawaiian Islands, immediately mobilizing thousands of frantic, heartbroken volunteers who selflessly dedicated their days to relentlessly scouring the dense tropical landscapes, the steep, muddy mountain ridges, and the rugged, unpredictable coastlines for any conceivable trace of the missing 19-year-old hairdresser. Over the course of 10 agonizing, suffocating days following her sudden disappearance, an overwhelming and unprecedented wave of community solidarity washed over the entire island of Oahu, resulting in the rapid printing, physical distribution, and meticulous placement of an estimated 150,000 missing person flyers that ultimately plastered virtually every single local storefront, telephone pole, community bulletin board, and public transit station across the windward and leeward coasts. The sheer, staggering scale of this desperate civic mobilization directly reflected the profound, collective terror firmly gripping the island community as ordinary citizens, local business owners, and seasoned law enforcement officers desperately clung to the rapidly fading hope that Lisa O was somehow still alive, perhaps temporarily trapped, severely injured, or hopelessly disoriented in the treacherous, rain-soaked wilderness following a tragic but survivable accident. However, despite the massive, highly coordinated influx of civilian manpower, the tireless, focused efforts of specialized police search dogs, and the relentless, exhausting combing of the deep, heavily vegetated windward valleys by experienced trackers, the agonizing, terrifying days slowly dragged on with absolutely no definitive physical evidence discovered, no credible sightings reported to the authorities, no monetary ransom demands made to the terrified family, and no chilling, anonymous communications received from any potential abductor. The suffocating, heavy silence that painfully defined those 10 excruciating days of endless searching was finally, devastatingly broken on the grim morning of January 31st, 1982, not by a highly coordinated police search party meticulously sweeping a designated grid, but by a chilling, completely random encounter occurring on a completely different, highly elevated part of the island. A local, unsuspecting civilian man was casually jogging alongside his dog through the cool, mist-shrouded, and heavily forested region of Mount Tantalus, a winding, remarkably scenic mountain area characterized by its steep drop-offs and dense tropical canopy overlooking the sprawling urban density of Honolulu, when his canine companion suddenly detected a deeply unsettling, unmistakable scent drifting upward from the impenetrable, wet vegetation far below the paved roadway. The curious and increasingly concerned jogger cautiously approached the dangerous edge of the steep, muddy embankment, peered downward into the shadows, and ultimately made the horrific, life-altering discovery that the entire island population had been deeply dreading for over a week. Explicitly spotting a lifeless human figure resting deep within a heavily overgrown, inaccessible ravine approximately 40 feet down the treacherous, nearly vertical slope. The immediate, chaotic deployment of numerous law enforcement units, forensic specialists, and medical examiners to the remote, highly secured mountain scene tragically confirmed the absolute worst, unspoken fears of the devastated O family and the exhausted community. positively identifying the severely decomposed human remains as those of the missing 19-year-old woman from Kailua. The deeply disturbing condition in which the body was ultimately discovered immediately and unequivocally escalated the frantic missing person investigation into a full-scale, high-priority homicide case, as the young woman was found completely unclothed in the dirt and bearing the devastating, irreversible physical toll of having been entirely exposed to the harsh tropical elements, relentless insect activity, and scavenging animals for 10 continuous, uninterrupted days of heavy rain and intense humidity. This grim, heartbreaking discovery situated high up on the slopes of Mount Tantalus instantly presented seasoned homicide detectives with a profoundly baffling, seemingly impossible geographical and logistical puzzle that fundamentally altered their entire comprehensive understanding of the crime and the sequence of events. The isolated, elevated location where the body was unceremoniously dumped was situated in a completely different, highly contradictory direction from the most logical, direct, and efficient driving route connecting the Makiki apartment complex, where she was last seen alive, and the dark, isolated stretch of road in Maunawili where her flooded, abandoned car had been inexplicably left behind on the night of the severe storm. This glaring, undeniable spatial discrepancy immediately confirmed to the investigative team that Lisa had absolutely not simply wandered away from her immobilized vehicle in a state of sudden medical confusion, nor had she suffered a tragic, completely accidental fate while attempting to seek shelter near her car, but rather, she had been deliberately, forcefully, and maliciously transported by an unknown, violent individual to the remote mountain ravine to purposefully conceal the heinous crime. Investigators were immediately forced to grapple with agonizing, highly complex questions regarding the precise sequence of events that fatal night, desperately trying to determine through circumstantial logic whether the ruthless perpetrator had violently intercepted her on the road, driven her personal car to Maunawili specifically to stage a highly deceptive scene, and then utilized a secondary, untraceable vehicle to transport her deceased body to the Tantalus location, or if she had been abruptly abducted directly from her car at the exact muddy location where the Toyota was ultimately found abandoned. As the terrified community collectively reeled from the shocking, undeniable confirmation of her brutal murder, a truly terrifying, highly credible witness account officially emerged that successfully sent an unprecedented, paralyzing shockwave of panic across the entire island, officially introducing the highly disturbing, incredibly plausible hypothesis that the unidentified perpetrator had strategically utilized the trusted guise of sworn law enforcement to successfully execute the nighttime abduction. A local witness bravely came forward to the authorities with a deeply unsettling, vivid report, explicitly claiming to have clearly observed a mysterious, unidentified vehicle aggressively tailing another civilian car through the blinding, heavy rain on the exact night of her sudden disappearance, distinctly noting that the aggressively pursuing vehicle was specifically equipped with a flashing blue light secretly mounted directly behind its front grille. In the specific historical and cultural context of 1982 Hawaii, unmarked police vehicles frequently and legally utilized these concealed, grille-mounted blue lights to seamlessly initiate standard traffic stops on the highways, immediately leading terrified investigators and the frantic, vulnerable public to the chilling, inescapable realization that the cunning killer might have actually been a highly organized police impersonator preying upon innocent motorists. This highly plausible and utterly terrifying theory strongly suggested that the ruthless perpetrator simply flashed a commanding blue light in the absolute darkness of the storm, immediately compelling Lisa to obediently pull her vehicle over to the dark, dangerous shoulder of the road in the pouring rain, fully and completely believing she was safely complying with the lawful, mandatory order of a legitimate, trusted police officer, only to be ruthlessly ambushed, overpowered, and violently abducted the absolute second she innocently rolled down her driver's side window. The sheer, unadulterated terror generated by the rapid public dissemination of this specific impersonator hypothesis caused widespread, palpable panic among female drivers navigating the roads throughout Honolulu, eventually prompting the Honolulu Police Department to take unprecedented, immediate, and sweeping administrative action by officially and permanently banning the deeply controversial use of concealed grille lights and strictly mandating that all unmarked patrol vehicles place their distinctive blue lights prominently and visibly on their roofs to desperately restore a deeply fractured sense of public trust and ensure civilian safety. The intense, overwhelming institutional focus on the blue light sighting and the impersonator theory eventually led the homicide investigators down an even darker, significantly more controversial, and heavily guarded path as they slowly began to seriously explore the truly horrifying, deeply uncomfortable possibility that the unidentified perpetrator was not merely a cunning civilian impersonator utilizing stolen equipment, but an actual, fully sworn, heavily armed law enforcement officer utilizing their official, unquestioned authority to purposefully commit the ultimate, unforgivable betrayal of public trust. This agonizing, deeply problematic suspicion was heavily fueled by the sudden resurfacing of several previous, highly concerning civilian complaints regarding deeply questionable, highly aggressive, and distinctly suspicious traffic stops recently conducted by certain active-duty officers operating in the general area, causing the highest levels of the investigative hierarchy to heavily and intensely concentrate on this internal, politically explosive angle for a significantly extended period of time. This intense internal focus represented a strategic, highly controversial investigative decision that several seasoned, retired detectives would later publicly argue caused the entire department to rapidly develop a severe, debilitating case of tunnel vision, tragically causing them to stubbornly ignore or severely underinvestigate other highly viable suspects, completely alternative theories, and vital pieces of peripheral evidence during the most critical, foundational weeks of the complex homicide investigation. Concurrently, while battling the internal paranoia generated by the police involvement theory, the homicide investigators were also legally and ethically obligated to thoroughly and aggressively examine the individuals geographically and emotionally closest to the young victim, naturally directing their intense, unforgiving scrutiny toward Doug Holmes, the young, grieving college student who unfortunately held the dual, highly unenviable, and deeply suspicious distinctions of being the absolute very last person to definitively see her alive, and the specific individual who ultimately discovered her abandoned, flooded vehicle on the side of the highway. Despite the intense, relentless, and psychologically grueling pressure of the active police investigation and the heavy, inevitable shadow of public suspicion that naturally and unfairly falls upon a romantic partner in the immediate aftermath of any unsolved homicide case, Doug Holmes willingly underwent rigorous, exhaustive police questioning, provided detailed timelines, and endured immense, suffocating public scrutiny without absolutely ever being arrested, officially charged with a crime, or officially named as a definitive primary suspect by any participating law enforcement agency. It is an absolutely crucial, fundamentally necessary, and legally vital distinction to make when recounting this specific tragedy, specifically cutting through decades of highly destructive, completely baseless internet speculation and persistent, deeply unfair community rumors. To unequivocally and firmly state that absolutely no concrete, physical forensic evidence, no credible eyewitness testimony, and absolutely no judicial ruling has ever implicated him in the commission of the crime. This absolute lack of evidence firmly and completely leaves the true identity of the monstrous individual who meticulously orchestrated the violent, calculated abduction on the rainy highway and the subsequent heartless disposal of the young woman's body on the steep slopes of Mount Tantalus, completely, maddeningly, and tragically unknown to this very day, cementing the agonizing mystery at the very core of the island's darkest history. The agonizing reality of the Lisa O case is not solely defined by the terrifying mystery of her abduction or the devastating discovery of her remains, but is equally characterized by a deeply frustrating institutional tragedy regarding the catastrophic failure to secure and preserve the fragile forensic truth. Because there has never been a dramatic courtroom trial, no dramatic presentation of undeniable physical evidence before a captivated jury, and absolutely no final judicial resolution providing closure to the grieving family. The true narrative of this case inevitably shifts away from the pursuit of justice and morphs into a dark, cautionary tale about missed opportunities and compromised investigative procedures. Many years after the frantic, rain-soaked searches had faded into a painful community memory, a highly respected former homicide detective named Burt Cornell, who possessed intimate knowledge of the investigative files, publicly expressed his deeply unsettling professional conviction that the initial handling of the case was severely, fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. The most devastating of these revelations pertained directly to the initial recovery and the subsequent medical examination of the young woman's body. Processes that are absolutely paramount in any complex homicide investigation where the crime scene has already been heavily compromised by severe weather and the passage of time. When the decision was ultimately made much later in the investigation to officially exhume the victim's remains in a desperate, belated attempt to uncover any overlooked clues utilizing slightly more advanced techniques, the returning forensic specialists were completely stunned to discover highly irregular, severely damaging procedural anomalies regarding how the body had been initially processed and preserved by the medical examiner's office back in 1982. To fully comprehend the catastrophic magnitude of these early procedural errors, one must understand that when a human body is left entirely exposed to the harsh, unforgiving elements of a tropical environment for 10 continuous days, every single microscopic fragment of remaining physical evidence becomes infinitely, incalculably precious to the overall integrity of the investigation. The severe state of decomposition, rapidly accelerated by the heavy tropical rains, the intense island humidity, and the natural, unavoidable ecological activity in the remote Tantalus ravine, had already relentlessly stripped away the most obvious, easily decipherable physiological clues regarding the exact, specific cause of her tragic death. In such highly degraded conditions, seasoned homicide investigators are entirely forced to rely on the meticulous, microscopic recovery of fragile trace evidence that might have miraculously survived the brutal exposure to the storm, such as a single, microscopic strand of the perpetrator's hair snagged on a fingernail, a tiny, seemingly insignificant synthetic fiber transferred from the upholstery of the killer's vehicle, distinct, geographically specific soil samples embedded in the victim's skin that could definitively trace her movements prior to her death, microscopic fragments of foreign botanical matter like leaves or seeds that could pinpoint a secondary crime scene, deeply hidden, highly subtle defensive wounds or faint ligature marks entirely obscured by the ongoing decomposition process, and the absolute most critical element of all, any surviving biological material belonging to the attacker. Tragically, due to a highly unfortunate, deeply regrettable combination of the intense, destructive environmental factors present at the ravine and the profoundly shocking, heavily criticized lack of rigorous forensic preservation during the initial autopsy procedures, these irreplaceable, microscopic fragments of truth were either irrevocably lost, entirely washed away, or severely, hopelessly contaminated beyond any useful scientific application. This tragic loss of physical evidence was further compounded, entirely magnified, and rendered utterly devastating by the severe, inescapable technological limitations that universally defined the entire global law enforcement landscape during the early 1980s. It is incredibly difficult for a modern observer, entirely accustomed to the swift, almost magical resolutions depicted in contemporary forensic science narratives, to fully grasp just how profoundly handicapped the investigators were in 1982. Operating in a starkly different era long before the revolutionary advent of modern forensic technology. They were attempting to solve a complex, geographically scattered abduction and murder without the immense, unparalleled investigative power of modern computerized DNA databases that can instantly link a single microscopic drop of bodily fluid to a known, registered offender across the country. They operated decades before the groundbreaking, highly controversial emergence of genealogical DNA tracing, a miraculous scientific tool that has recently solved countless notorious cold cases by identifying perpetrators through their distant, unsuspecting relatives who submitted genetic material to commercial ancestry websites. Furthermore, the detectives traversing the dark, flooded roads of Oahu in 1982 were completely deprived of the omnipresent, highly sophisticated digital surveillance network that entirely blankets our modern society. Meaning there were absolutely no high-definition traffic cameras positioned at major intersections to silently capture the blurry, fleeting image of her 1976 Toyota being aggressively followed. No ubiquitous security cameras mounted on residential porches or commercial storefronts to continuously monitor the treacherous mountain passes, and absolutely no cellular phone towers or digital GPS satellites to quietly, precisely track the exact minute-by-minute geographical movements of either the victim or her unknown assailant on that fateful, stormy night. Without these vital, modern technological crutches, and having been tragically robbed of the foundational physical evidence due to the early forensic missteps, the investigators were ultimately forced to rely entirely on the fragile, notoriously unreliable nature of human memory. Desperately chasing fading, contradictory witness statements and attempting to construct a coherent narrative from a chaotic, deeply confusing web of circumstantial theories. The sheer absence of definitive, scientific proof eventually allowed the active investigation to fracture into three primary, highly distinct and passionately debated hypothetical scenarios, each attempting to logically explain the terrifying sequence of events that led to her death. Yet none possessing the necessary evidentiary weight to definitively secure a criminal indictment or a legal conviction. The first and arguably most infamous of these deeply entrenched theories, which heavily dominated the early years of the investigation and profoundly terrified the island population, was the chilling hypothesis that she had fallen victim to a highly organized, predatory individual maliciously impersonating a sworn police officer, or perhaps even a rogue, active-duty member of law enforcement utilizing their official authority to commit murder. This terrifying theory heavily relied on the deeply unsettling, highly publicized witness account of the mysterious vehicle utilizing a concealed blue grille light to forcefully stop another car in the blinding rain, suggesting that the perpetrator exploited the victim's inherent civic trust in authority to easily gain compliance, orchestrate the roadside abduction, and subsequently plunge the entire community into a state of profound, lingering paranoia. While this police impersonator theory perfectly, logically explains the bizarre, contradictory presence of her abandoned vehicle with its deeply flooded interior and her deliberately removed identification papers, the complete, devastating lack of any physical evidence directly linking any specific officer or known impersonator to the crime scene ultimately relegated this compelling scenario to the frustrating realm of unproven speculation. The second primary theory, seriously entertained by the authorities, sharply pivots away from the concept of a random, predatory stranger and deeply explores the highly unsettling, psychologically disturbing possibility that the perpetrator was someone she personally knew, an acquaintance or a peripheral figure in her social circle who deliberately targeted her. Proponents of this specific acquaintance hypothesis strongly argue that the killer must have possessed an intimate, prior knowledge of her personal schedule, deeply understood her routine travel routes between the windward and leeward sides of the island, and maintained a strong, chilling familiarity with the highly remote, easily concealed geographical topography of the Mount Tantalus region where her remains were ultimately deposited. However, despite subjecting numerous individuals in her wider social periphery to intense, grueling interrogations and exhaustive background checks, law enforcement has never officially released any concrete, definitive proof pointing toward a specific, known associate, leaving this theory entirely reliant on psychological deduction rather than tangible, admissible facts. The third, deeply terrifying, and entirely plausible hypothesis suggests that her tragic death was the devastating, random result of a horrific crime of opportunity, violently executed by a completely unknown, highly dangerous stranger who simply crossed her path on the dark, isolated highway during the absolute worst possible weather conditions. In this bleak scenario, the blinding rain, the severely reduced visibility, the deafening noise of the storm, and the complete lack of passing motorists created a perfect, highly isolated, and totally unobserved environment for a violent predator to suddenly strike, overpowering her, abducting her, and leaving absolutely no living witnesses to the brutal, chaotic encounter. The profound, terrifying randomness of this theory is deeply unsettling, suggesting that there was no grand, calculated conspiracy or targeted animosity, but simply a tragic, fatal intersection of bad timing, severe weather, and the sudden, unpredictable manifestation of pure, unadulterated human evil on a lonely stretch of asphalt. Adding a final, deeply complex, and highly sensationalized layer to this convoluted web of investigative theories is the persistent, enduring community speculation attempting to definitively link the young woman's tragic fate to the later, highly publicized reign of terror inflicted by the unidentified serial killer known as the Honolulu Strangler. During the mid-1980s, precisely 3 years after she vanished in the storm, a terrifying, highly methodical predator violently stalked the island of Oahu, brutally murdering a series of young, vulnerable women and leaving their unclothed bodies in various isolated locations across the island, instantly sparking widespread, deeply entrenched rumors that the 1982 incident was actually the horrific, unrecognized prologue to this larger string of serial murders. Those who passionately advocate for this highly controversial connection quickly point to the chilling, undeniable similarities regarding the young age of the victims, the deeply disturbing manner in which the bodies were uniformly found without clothing, and the general geographical proximity of the brutal crimes. However, it is an absolute, fundamental imperative to state with complete clarity and objective finality that official law enforcement agencies, current homicide detectives, and all established historical records have absolutely never officially, scientifically, or legally linked this specific 1982 tragedy to the confirmed, recognized victims of the Honolulu Strangler. This proposed serial killer connection remains entirely and exclusively within the realm of unconfirmed, speculative community lore, a desperate, psychological attempt by a traumatized public to neatly categorize and logically explain a horrific, isolated tragedy by forcing it into the broader, more sensationalized narrative of a known, terrifying serial predator. The absolute, undeniable tragedy of the investigative process is that the intense, overwhelming focus on these dramatic, highly publicized theories, combined with the catastrophic, irreversible loss of crucial forensic evidence and the severe technological limitations of the era, ultimately created a dense, impenetrable fog of confusion that successfully shielded the perpetrator from justice. The case files remain open, the deeply faded documents sit in cold storage, and the desperate, lingering questions remain tragically unanswered, serving as a bleak, enduring testament to the profound limitations of human justice when the fragile, irreplaceable evidence of the truth is carelessly washed away by the relentless, unforgiving rain. More than 4 decades have relentlessly passed since the violent, blinding storm swept across the island of Oahu and permanently stole a vibrant 19-year-old girl from her family. Yet the chilling classification of this heartbreaking case remains tragically and stubbornly unchanged in the official records of the Honolulu Police Department. According to the most recent, sobering retrospectives broadcast by PBS Hawaii and numerous deeply researched investigative reports published by contemporary local media outlets, the brutal murder of Lisa O officially stands as one of the most notorious, frustrating, and enduring cold cases in the entire criminal history of the state. Despite the massive, unprecedented initial community search efforts that saw 150,000 flyers distributed across the islands, despite the exhaustive, agonizing interrogations of those closest to her, and despite the endless, speculative theories that have captivated the terrified public imagination for generations, there has absolutely never been a single arrest made in connection with her abduction and death. The profound, undeniable reality is that no suspect has ever been formally indicted by a grand jury. No individual has ever been forced to stand trial in a court of law to face the damning evidence of this horrific crime. And absolutely no legal conviction has ever been secured to offer a semblance of closure to a family completely shattered by grief. The police files, undoubtedly filled with thousands of pages of fading, typewritten witness statements, contradictory investigative leads, and tragic forensic missteps, continue to gather dust in the silent, temperature-controlled archives of the Cold Case Unit, serving as a grim, physical monument to a catastrophic failure of the justice system. The passage of over 40 years has cruelly transformed the active, desperate hunt for a vicious killer into a somber, historical puzzle, steadily eroding the fading memories of the surviving witnesses and severely diminishing the already fragile hope that modern, advanced forensic technology might one day miraculously extract a definitive answer from the heavily compromised, degraded physical evidence that barely survived the tropical elements. This complete, absolute lack of official resolution represents a profound, festering wound for the local community, a chilling, persistent reminder that despite the comforting illusions of modern safety and the diligent efforts of law enforcement, it is still entirely possible for an individual to commit an act of unspeakable, monstrous violence against an innocent young woman and simply vanish like a ghost into the chaotic, blinding darkness of a severe winter storm, successfully evading all earthly consequences for their horrific actions. The immense, immeasurable psychological toll of this enduring lack of justice extends far beyond the sterile, bureaucratic confines of the police department archives, violently rippling outward to permanently alter the fundamental emotional landscape of the affected communities across the island. For the deeply connected, tight-knit residents of Kailua, the town that Lisa lovingly called her home, the sudden, violent intrusion of this unsolved mystery irreversibly shattered the comforting, naive illusion of absolute suburban safety that had previously defined their tranquil, sun-drenched coastal existence. The terrifying, unresolved narrative of a young, familiar local girl being inexplicably abducted while simply attempting to drive home from a completely ordinary evening out successfully injected a profound, lingering sense of collective paranoia into the very cultural fabric of the Windward Side, forcing parents to cast anxious, lingering glances at the darkening skies whenever the heavy winter rains begin to fall upon the Kolal Mountains. This pervasive, generational trauma is not merely an abstract, sociological concept, but a deeply personal, agonizing daily reality for the loved ones she tragically left behind, who have been cruelly condemned to endure a lifetime of excruciating, unanswered questions that relentlessly torment their waking hours and haunt their darkest nightmares. To lose a child, a sister, or a cherished friend to a sudden, violent act of murder is an apocalyptic emotional catastrophe in its own right, but to be entirely denied the fundamental human necessity of knowing exactly who committed the atrocity and precisely why it happened adds a layer of unfathomable, exquisite psychological torture to the grieving process. The family of Lisa O has been forced to navigate the incredibly difficult, emotionally exhausting trajectory of the last 40 years while carrying the incredibly heavy, suffocating burden of this profound uncertainty, attending family gatherings, celebrating quiet milestones, and simply attempting to survive while the empty, glaring void left by her sudden absence continually echoes with the agonizing, silent question of the killer's identity. They have watched helplessly as the vibrant, deeply personal memory of the girl they loved has been slowly, inevitably transformed by the relentless passage of time and the sensational nature of the media into a tragic, two-dimensional true crime cautionary tale, constantly fighting to ensure that her beautiful humanity is not entirely eclipsed by the gruesome, horrifying details of her unsolved murder. In the final analysis of this heartbreaking narrative, it is absolutely imperative that we consciously strip away the clinical, detached language of the ongoing police investigation, reject the sensationalized, highly speculative theories of rogue police impersonators and wandering serial killers, and gently return our complete, undivided focus to the radiant, breathing human being whose precious life was violently, mercilessly extinguished on that dark highway. The true, enduring tragedy of this cold case is not the frustrating lack of forensic evidence, the confusing geographical puzzle of the abandoned Toyota, or the dramatic, sweeping changes made to the lighting equipment of unmarked police patrol vehicles, but rather the profound, incalculable loss of a genuinely kind, vibrant 19-year-old woman who had absolutely everything to live for. We must actively remember Lisa O not merely as a tragic victim discovered in a remote, overgrown ravine on Mount Tantalus, but as the cheerful, dedicated young hairdresser who spent her days bringing beauty, comfort, and warm conversation to the grateful clients sitting in her chair at the Susan Beer salon in the heart of Kailua. She was a young woman possessing a deeply compassionate spirit, a beloved daughter who deeply valued her familial connections, a loyal friend who effortlessly brightened the lives of those fortunate enough to exist in her social orbit, and a young romantic partner excitedly navigating the complex, beautiful threshold of early adulthood. When her life was brutally interrupted by the unknown perpetrator in the blinding rain, the world did not just lose a physical presence, it was violently robbed of all the subsequent decades of joy, love, professional achievement, and personal growth that she was undoubtedly destined to experience and share with her community. Every single haircut she would have meticulously styled, every comforting conversation she would have warmly initiated, every family milestone she would have joyously celebrated, and every single dream she would have eventually realized were completely, permanently erased in an instant of senseless, cowardly violence. Centering her humanity in this narrative fundamentally demands that we recognize the profound, irreplaceable void her death created in the universe, fiercely honoring the beautiful, ordinary reality of her 19 years rather than allowing her legacy to be entirely defined by the terrifying, chaotic mystery of her final, unobserved moments on Earth. As we ultimately step back to reflect upon the dark, twisting labyrinth of the Lisa O case, we are confronted with a deeply unsettling, highly uncomfortable philosophical realization about the inherent fragility of justice and the terrifying, random nature of human vulnerability. The heavy, relentless winter rain that catastrophically flooded her abandoned vehicle in Maunawili and tragically washed away the microscopic forensic clues on the steep slopes of Mount Tantalus serves as a powerful, devastating metaphor for the unforgiving passage of time. Time is a relentless natural force that continuously erodes the sharp edges of memory, violently obscures the fragile pathways to the truth, and slowly buries the darkest secrets of the past under the heavy weight of the passing decades. Yet, despite the complete absence of a judicial resolution and the fading hopes of a definitive investigative breakthrough, the heartbreaking story of the 19-year-old hairdresser from Kailua absolutely refuses to be entirely forgotten. Stubbornly persisting in the collective consciousness of the Hawaiian Islands as a poignant, enduring demand for ultimate accountability. Her tragic, unsolved narrative serves as a stark, uncompromising reminder that behind every faded missing person poster, behind every dusty, neglected cold case file, and behind every sensationalized true crime podcast, there is a real, deeply loved human being whose absence continues to violently break the hearts of those left behind in the silent aftermath. Until the day finally arrives when a hidden conscience breaks, a revolutionary new scientific technique miraculously bridges the decades-long gap, or a long-concealed piece of evidence is finally brought into the unforgiving light of day. The beautiful island of Oahu will forever remain haunted by the chilling, persistent echoes of that terrible January storm. And in the quiet, solemn moments when the heavy tropical rains return to batter the towering ridges of the Kola Mountains and flood the winding coastal highways, the collective soul of the community will always be forced to silently, agonizingly ask the one question that has relentlessly defied every attempt at an answer for more than 40 years. Who killed Lisa O? The passage of more than 4 decades has done absolutely nothing to diminish the profound sense of sorrow, the enduring communal trauma, and the haunting aura of unresolved terror that permanently surrounds the tragic disappearance and brutal murder of 19-year-old Lisa O. A deeply frustrating cold case that continues to cast a long, chilling shadow over the sun-drenched landscapes of Oahu and remains entirely unsolved to this very day. As we delve into the lasting legacy and the profound aftermath of this heartbreaking mystery, it becomes increasingly necessary to examine not just the physical evidence, the agonizing investigative missteps, or the frustrating lack of judicial resolution, but the deep, permanent psychological scars inflicted upon a vibrant island community that was violently robbed of its inherent innocence on that torrential, blinding January night in 1982. The windward side of the island, particularly the tightly knit, peaceful suburban enclave of Kailua where Lisa lived her daily life and passionately worked as a cheerful, friendly hairdresser at the Susan Beer Salon, was fundamentally and irreversibly altered by the sudden, terrifying realization that unimaginable, predatory darkness could easily infiltrate their safe, familiar streets, hidden perfectly beneath the deafening, chaotic roar of a severe winter storm. For the terrified residents who anxiously lived through the agonizing weeks of the massive initial search effort, which saw thousands of desperate volunteers distribute an estimated 150,000 missing person flyers across the island, and the subsequent horrifying discovery of her remains on Mount Tantalus, the heavy, blinding tropical rains that periodically sweep across the jagged peaks of the Kola mountain range no longer simply represent the natural, nourishing climate of the beautiful Hawaiian archipelago, but rather serve as a dark, recurring atmospheric reminder of the exact terrifying environmental conditions that perfectly masked a brutal killer's violent, cowardly actions. The collective memory of the island remains permanently, stubbornly anchored to the deeply unsettling, deeply contradictory physical images left behind at the desolate crime scene in the Maunawili area, where the young woman's metallic 1976 Toyota sat completely abandoned and heavily flooded on the muddy, isolated shoulder of the road near the old Kailua drive-in, transforming a perfectly mundane vehicle into a terrifying, enduring monument to sudden, coercive violence and sudden abduction. Those specific, baffling details, the driver's side window inexplicably rolled down completely to the harsh, punishing elements despite the freezing, torrential downpour, the 5 to 7 centimeters of stagnant, murky rainwater pooling heavily on the ruined floorboards, the completely soaked driver's seat, and the chilling, impossible presence of a perfectly dry personal purse deliberately stripped of its highly specific identification and vehicle registration papers, continue to endlessly circle in the analytical minds of armchair detectives, seasoned homicide investigators and terrified citizens alike, serving as a maddening, seemingly unsolvable puzzle that brutally defies all human logic, contradicts basic roadside survival instincts, and strongly points toward a highly organized, deceptive interruption. This enduring, maddening mystery is profoundly magnified and tragically complicated by the devastating, catastrophic failure of the initial forensic investigation. A deeply regrettable institutional blunder that former seasoned homicide detective Bert Cornell later bravely exposed to local news outlets like Hawaii News Now, publicly revealing that the highly flawed initial handling, the severely inadequate preservation, and the deeply problematic medical examination of the young woman's severely decomposed remains ultimately, permanently destroyed whatever fragile, microscopic truths might have miraculously survived 10 consecutive days of brutal, uninterrupted exposure to the unforgiving tropical elements, relentless insect activity, and scavenging animals within the remote mountain ravine. The agonizing, irreversible realization that crucial, irreplaceable physical trace evidence, perhaps a single, microscopic strand of the attacker's hair, a transferred synthetic fiber from the upholstery of the killer's unknown vehicle, geographically distinct soil samples, microscopic botanical matter like leaves or seeds, deeply hidden defensive wounds, or the absolutely vital biological material of the perpetrator, was carelessly lost, entirely washed away, or severely, hopelessly contaminated due to procedural incompetence, adds a layer of deep, suffocating frustration to an already devastating narrative, effectively cementing the tragic case's grim, unyielding status as an eternally unsolvable enigma entirely trapped in a restrictive historical era long before the revolutionary, world-changing advent of modern computerized DNA databases, genealogical genetic tracing, widespread high-definition traffic cameras, cellular mobile phones, and ubiquitous digital GPS tracking technology. Bereft of the undeniable, absolute certainty provided by modern forensic science, the desperate, severely handicapped police investigation was tragically forced to rely entirely upon the inherently flawed, deeply malleable nature of human memory and chaotic, circumstantial speculation, directly leading to the frantic, terrifying proliferation of various compelling but ultimately unprovable theories that fiercely divided the island population and misdirected crucial, limited law enforcement resources for years. The most notorious, highly publicized, and deeply terrifying of these specific hypotheses, heavily fueled by a solitary, highly credible civilian witness account of a mysterious, unidentified vehicle utilizing a concealed blue grille light to aggressively pull over another unsuspecting car in the blinding, chaotic rain on the exact night of her disappearance, strongly suggested that the ruthless perpetrator was a cunning, highly organized police impersonator or perhaps even a rogue, active-duty member of law enforcement heavily exploiting the public's inherent, ingrained civic trust to seamlessly execute the roadside abduction without causing immediate alarm. This terrifying, highly plausible concept instantly sparked widespread, paralyzing panic among vulnerable female motorists navigating the dark roads of Honolulu and eventually forced the Honolulu Police Department to drastically, permanently alter its official administrative policies, strictly banning the controversial use of hidden grille lights and exclusively mandating highly visible roof-mounted blue lights for all unmarked patrol vehicles in a desperate, sweeping attempt to quickly restore a deeply fractured sense of community safety and public trust. Concurrently, the intense, unforgiving investigative scrutiny naturally and inevitably directed toward those individuals located geographically and emotionally closest to the victim placed an immense, crushing psychological burden upon her grieving college boyfriend, Doug Holmes, who had simply spent a quiet, completely ordinary evening eating poke and talking with Lisa in his sister's Makiki apartment before tragically becoming the absolute last person to definitively see her alive and the highly unfortunate individual who eventually discovered her abandoned, flooded car during his frantic morning search in the terrifying aftermath of the severe storm. Despite willingly enduring grueling, highly aggressive police interrogations, providing detailed timelines of his movements, and suffering through decades of relentless, deeply unfair public suspicion, heavily fueled by baseless internet rumors and malicious community gossip, it is an absolute, incontrovertible factual imperative to clearly reiterate that absolutely no concrete physical forensic evidence, no credible eyewitness testimony, and absolutely no legal indictment or judicial ruling has ever officially implicated him in the horrific crime, leaving the true identity of the monstrous individual who violently intercepted her on that dark highway completely and utterly unknown to the justice system. Similarly, the deeply disturbing, highly speculative community rumors desperately attempting to officially link Lisa's brutal, unsolved murder to the subsequent, terrifying 1985 and 1986 reign of the unidentified serial killer widely known as the Honolulu Strangler remain entirely unconfirmed by active law enforcement agencies, representing a frantic, psychological attempt by a severely traumatized, frightened public to neatly categorize and logically explain an isolated, chaotic, and senseless tragedy by forcefully attaching it to a broader, more sensationalized narrative of recognized, systemic evil due to the superficial similarities of the victims being young women discovered unclothed in remote areas. When we systematically strip away the dense, suffocating layers of these dramatic, highly publicized investigative theories, the shocking, irreversible procedural forensic failures, the lack of modern technology, and the endless, terrifying speculation regarding cunning police impersonators, deceptive roadside stops, and phantom serial killers, we are ultimately left with the most profound, agonizing, and fundamentally important aspect of this entire dark, unresolved saga, the complete, absolute, and profoundly irreversible destruction of a beautiful, vibrant 19-year-old human life that was entirely brimming with untapped potential. Lisa O was absolutely not merely a fascinating, morbid subject for a true crime broadcast, nor was she simply a faded, black and white photograph printed on 150,000 desperate missing person flyers rapidly distributed across the panic-stricken island by grieving volunteers. She was a deeply beloved daughter whose parents never recovered from the shock, a cherished family member, a loyal, empathetic friend, and a remarkably talented, cheerful young hairdresser who spent her days bringing joy, warmth, and genuine human connection to the grateful clients sitting in her chair at the local salon. She was a completely innocent young woman possessing a profoundly compassionate, caring spirit, standing happily on the exciting, beautiful threshold of early adulthood with her entire unwritten future stretching out brightly before her, maintaining strong, loving relationships, holding on to specific, personal plans for her life, and remaining completely, blissfully oblivious to the horrific, unimaginable darkness silently waiting for her on the rain-swept highway as she simply attempted to make the routine, highly familiar drive home from her boyfriend's apartment on an ordinary Wednesday night. The absolute, undeniable, and deeply heartbreaking tragedy is that her bright, promising life was violently, cowardly extinguished by a completely faceless, unidentified predator who callously discarded her unclothed body in a remote, deeply overgrown ravine located 40 feet down the steep, treacherous, and heavily forested slopes of Mount Tantalus, leaving her remains entirely exposed to the harsh, unforgiving tropical elements for 10 agonizing days, while her frantic, devastated family and a desperate, fully mobilized community relentlessly searched the island while clinging to a rapidly fading, desperate hope for her safe return. The profound, generational pain quietly endured by her surviving family members, who have been cruelly condemned to navigate the incredibly difficult, emotionally exhausting trajectory of the last 4 decades carrying the crushing, suffocating weight of this unresolved nightmare without any official answers, is a tragic, enduring testament to the highly destructive power of violent crime and the catastrophic, agonizing failure of the judicial system to provide fundamental accountability, closure, and legal justice for the innocent victims it is sworn to passionately protect. They have been forced to agonizingly witness the vibrant, beautiful, and deeply personal memory of the young girl they fiercely loved slowly transform into a public spectacle, a morbid curiosity constantly dissected, analyzed, and debated by complete strangers who can never truly comprehend the devastating, endless silence that permanently filled the O household the terrifying morning they finally realized she had never returned from the violent storm, leaving behind only a flooded car and a dry purse as her final, terrifying earthly legacy. As we respectfully conclude this detailed, exhaustive examination of one of Oahu's most notorious, heartbreaking, and persistent cold cases, the story serves as a stark, uncompromising, and deeply terrifying reminder of the absolute fragility of our daily existence, illustrating the chilling reality that some of the most horrific, meticulously orchestrated acts of human violence can sometimes successfully evade the reach of earthly justice, quietly fading into the dark, hidden corners of local history without ever yielding a single, definitive answer to the desperate pleas of the grieving community. The silently abandoned 1976 Toyota, the deeply flooded vehicle interior, the completely impossible perfectly dry personal purse, the deliberately missing driver's identification and registration papers, the terrifying, unconfirmed sighting of the flashing blue police grille light in the blinding midnight rain, the severely botched, tragic forensic autopsy that destroyed crucial evidence, and the isolated, heavily overgrown natural ravine on the steep slopes of Mount Tantalus all collectively remain frozen permanently in time, forming a grim, unbreakable, and endlessly frustrating constellation of unanswered questions that continues to relentlessly haunt the collective conscience and the historical memory of the beautiful Hawaiian Islands. And until the seemingly impossible, miraculous day finally arrives when a deeply hidden truth is unexpectedly revealed by modern science, a long-forgotten, crucial piece of physical evidence is miraculously uncovered from cold storage, or the incredibly heavy, unbearable burden of a guilty conscience finally forces a dramatic, long-overdue confession into the unforgiving light of day, the beautiful, tragic, and deeply cherished memory of Lisa, O will continue to patiently, silently wait for the justice she was so brutally and unfairly denied. Her powerful, unresolved story serving as an eternal, heartbreaking, and deeply terrifying echo hiding forever within the relentless, torrential winter rains of Oahu. As we reach the absolute culmination of this exhaustive journey, through one of the most haunting and deeply frustrating unsolved mysteries in the entire criminal history of the Hawaiian archipelago, it is fundamentally necessary to meticulously examine the unique, suffocating architecture of a cold case and the profound, enduring psychological weight it permanently inflicts upon the collective consciousness of an entire generation. When a brutal homicide investigation slowly transitions from an active, desperate, daily manhunt into a stagnant, historical archive, the tragic reality of the victim's life is cruelly reduced to a sterile collection of slowly deteriorating physical objects sitting forgotten in a heavily secured, temperature-controlled evidence locker buried deep within the bureaucratic labyrinth of the police department. The thousands of pages of typewritten witness statements, the desperately scribbled detective notes detailing the impossible contradictions of the crime scene, the blurry, black-and-white crime scene photographs of the abandoned metallic 1976 Toyota, and the heavily scrutinized, highly problematic autopsy reports begin to physically age, the ink fading and the paper yellowing as the relentless, unforgiving passage of decades silently mocks the agonizing lack of a judicial resolution. The original, seasoned homicide detectives who passionately worked the flooded, rain-swept crime scene in the desolate area of Mauna Wili and stood in the remote, heavily overgrown ravine on Mount Tantalus eventually retire, physically exhausted and deeply haunted by the inescapable, crushing realization that they completely failed to identify the monster who violently stole 19-year-old Lisa O from her loving family, ultimately being forced to hand over the massive, unsolved case files to an entirely new, younger generation of law enforcement officers who possess absolutely no personal, emotional connection to the victim or the terrified community that frantically searched for her in the dark winter of 1982. This generational transfer of investigative responsibility highlights a profound, terrifying vulnerability inherent within the criminal justice system, demonstrating exactly how the agonizing pursuit of truth can slowly lose its urgent, burning momentum as the years stretch endlessly into decades, leaving the shattered, grieving family trapped in a permanent, excruciating state of psychological purgatory formally recognized by mental health professionals as ambiguous loss. This specific, devastating type of grief occurs when there is a catastrophic, violent interruption of life without any accompanying truth, closure, or fundamental understanding of the exact circumstances, forcing the surviving parents, siblings, and loved ones to continuously navigate a terrifying emotional landscape where the final, definitive chapter of the young woman's life is endlessly, obsessively rewritten by their own darkest fears and agonizing imaginations. They are cruelly denied the basic, fundamental human right to know exactly who inflicted such unimaginable terror upon the gentle girl they loved, specifically why she was targeted on that blinding, torrential night after leaving the apartment in Makiki, and precisely what she endured in those final, unobserved moments after she innocently rolled down the driver's side window of her vehicle to speak to the unknown predator lingering in the blinding rain. The enduring, unresolved nature of the crime forces the family to carry a suffocating, invisible burden through every single subsequent milestone of their lives, heavily coloring every joyous family celebration, every quiet holiday gathering, and every passing anniversary with the dark, heavy, and inescapable shadow of her violent, completely unexplained absence. Furthermore, the immense psychological toll of this agonizing mystery extends far beyond the immediate, shattered family unit, successfully inflicting a deep, permanent, and highly specific cultural scar upon the entire island of Oahu, fundamentally altering the way local residents perceive the heavily romanticized, idyllic safety of their beautiful tropical environment. For the individuals who personally lived through the profound, paralyzing terror of the desperate 10-day search efforts, constantly seeing her face printed on the staggering 150,000 missing person posters distributed across the island, and the subsequent, highly publicized community panic regarding the terrifying possibility of a cunning police impersonator utilizing a flashing blue grill light to abduct vulnerable women. The physical landscape of the island has been permanently overlaid with a dark, sinister geography of trauma. The winding, scenic coastal highways, the steep, heavily forested mountain passes connecting the bustling urban center of Honolulu to the quiet, breezy suburban enclaves of the windward side, and specifically the dense, towering ridges of the Kolaw Mountains are no longer simply breathtaking natural wonders, but rather serve as permanent, silent monuments to a horrific, unsolved atrocity that successfully shattered the inherent, trusting innocence of the local population. Whenever a massive, severe winter storm system descends upon the archipelago, violently whipping the palm trees with aggressive, howling gusts of wind and overwhelming the island's drainage systems with blinding, relentless sheets of horizontal rain, the deeply ingrained generational trauma is instantly, viscerally reawakened in the minds of those who distinctly remember the absolute terror of that January night. The deafening roar of the heavy tropical downpour serves as a chilling, atmospheric trigger, instantly transporting the collective memory of the community back to the muddy, isolated shoulder of the road near the old Kailua Drive-In, forcing them to mentally envision the deeply flooded interior of the abandoned Toyota, the completely soaked driver's seat, the impossible, perfectly dry personal purse sitting amidst the ruin, the missing identification papers, and the utterly terrifying, agonizing realization that a ruthless, calculating killer successfully utilized the absolute chaos of the storm to execute a flawless abduction and completely vanish without leaving a single, definitive trace of their identity. This enduring, terrifying realization that human evil can successfully blend into the violent, destructive forces of nature and permanently evade the most desperate, comprehensive efforts of modern law enforcement creates a lingering, pervasive sense of existential vulnerability that directly contradicts the highly marketed, universally accepted image of Hawaii as an impenetrable, sun-drenched sanctuary completely insulated from the random, senseless violence that plagues the mainland. The total, catastrophic failure of the judicial system to ever secure a single criminal arrest, to ever present undeniable forensic evidence before a captivated jury, or to ever force the unidentified perpetrator to stand in a court of law and finally answer for the brutal, cowardly destruction of a 19-year-old life leaves a gaping, festering wound in the moral fabric of the society, constantly challenging the fundamental, comforting assumption that justice will eventually, inevitably prevail for the innocent. As we meticulously reflect upon the frustrating, convoluted labyrinth of investigative missteps, the tragic, irreversible loss of highly fragile, microscopic trace evidence due to the deeply flawed initial handling of her remains, and the severe, unavoidable technological limitations of the early 1980s that severely handicapped the desperate detectives, we are forced to deeply contemplate the evolving, highly complicated definition of justice in a case that has remained completely frozen in time for over 40 years. If the monstrous individual who meticulously orchestrated the roadside abduction and heartlessly discarded her unclothed body in the remote, overgrown ravine located 40 feet down the steep embankment is already deceased, having lived out the entirety of their natural life completely unburdened by the earthly, legal consequences of their horrific actions, what does ultimate justice actually look like today for the devastated O family and the heavily traumatized community of Kailua? True justice, in the profound, agonizing absence of a physical arrest or a dramatic courtroom conviction, must therefore be fundamentally redefined as the absolute, unwavering, and relentless preservation of the unvarnished historical truth and the fierce, protective elevation of the victim's beautiful, stolen humanity over the dark, sensationalized narrative of her unsolved murder. We must actively, consciously, and deliberately refused to allow 19-year-old Lisa O to be permanently categorized as a mere historical footnote, a chilling, campfire cautionary tale told to frighten young female drivers navigating the dark roads, or a tragic, two-dimensional character existing solely within the sterile, bureaucratic confines of a fading, dusty police file. It is an absolute, undeniable moral imperative to constantly center the vibrant, deeply compassionate reality of her brief, beautiful existence, remembering her not for the terrifying, chaotic mystery of her final night, but for the immense, radiant joy she effortlessly brought to her parents, her friends, her college boyfriend Doug Holmes, and the countless, grateful clients who routinely sat in her chair at the Susan Beer Salon. She was a young woman possessing a uniquely warm, empathetic spirit, happily navigating the exciting, complicated threshold of early adulthood with a heart completely full of bright, optimistic plans for a future that was violently, mercilessly stolen from her by a faceless, cowardly predator who absolutely did not possess a fraction of her inherent worth, kindness, or basic human decency. By consistently remembering her radiant smile, her deeply caring nature, and her profound, undeniable impact on the Windward community, we actively deny the unidentified killer the ultimate, absolute victory of completely erasing her beautiful light from the world, ensuring that her profound humanity permanently outlives the cowardly darkness of their horrific, unpunished crime. And while the faded, typewritten documents continue to slowly deteriorate in the silent archives of the Cold Case Unit, and while the steep, treacherous slopes of Mount Tantalus continue to be periodically washed by the heavy, blinding tropical rains, the enduring, heartbreaking story of the 19-year-old hairdresser from Kailua will remain a powerful, eternal testament to the deeply agonizing, unresolved nature of human loss and the relentless, undeniable human need for ultimate truth. Until the highly improbable, miraculous day when a sudden, unexpected technological breakthrough miraculously extracts a hidden, microscopic genetic profile from the degraded evidence, or an incredibly heavy, suffocating guilty conscience finally breaks decades of cowardly silence to provide the desperate, grieving family with the definitive answers they have been so cruelly denied. The beautiful island of Oahu will forever hold the tragic, unresolved memory of Lisa O close to its heart, her powerful, lingering spirit permanently serving as a silent, heartbreaking, and fiercely enduring demand for the absolute justice that still, agonizingly, remains hidden somewhere in the dark, relentless, and completely unforgiving rain. The relentless progression of time possesses a uniquely cruel duality when it intersects with the profound tragedy of an unsolved homicide acting simultaneously as a slow, agonizing mechanism of fading memory and an immovable heavy weight pressing constantly upon the shattered hearts of the survivors, who are permanently trapped in the terrifying echo of 1982. For over 4 decades, the vibrant island of Oahu has continued to physically evolve around the dark epicenter of this tragic mystery, with new generations of residents and millions of transient visitors completely oblivious to the profound historical trauma deeply embedded within the winding asphalt arteries connecting the bustling urban sprawl of Honolulu to the quiet sun-drenched suburban enclaves of the Windward Coast. The lush tropical foliage covering the steep, imposing slopes of Mount Tantalus has grown and died back dozens of times, entirely reclaiming the remote, treacherous ravine where the young woman was brutally discarded, while the winding coastal road passing through Mauna Wili, near the site of the old drive-in theater, remains a quiet stretch of asphalt hiding the terrifying ghosts of that blinding winter storm. Yet beneath this deceptive veneer of constant tropical renewal and the perpetual motion of modern island life, the tragic, unsolved case of 19-year-old Lisa O remains an immovable frozen monolith of unresolved grief, permanently casting a long, suffocating shadow over the collective conscience of the Hawaiian community and serving as a deeply unsettling reminder of the profound limitations inherent within the human pursuit of legal justice. The stark, horrifying contrast between the heavily romanticized perception of Hawaii as an idyllic, impenetrable paradise, completely insulated from mainland violence, and the brutal, undeniable reality of a cunning, unidentified predator successfully executing a flawless roadside abduction in the middle of a catastrophic midnight monsoon continues to deeply unsettle anyone who takes the time to truly study the agonizing details of this enduring cold case. The local community is continually forced to grapple with the terrifying, undeniable fact that a young, innocent woman possessing a heart full of compassion and a bright, unwritten future could simply vanish from a flooded vehicle, leaving behind only an impossibly dry personal purse, and deliberately extracted identification papers, while the entire island mobilized in a frantic, desperate, but ultimately futile search effort. The profound, devastating failure of the initial forensic investigation, heavily exacerbated by severe procedural missteps during the recovery and medical examination of her heavily decomposed remains, represents a catastrophic institutional blunder that successfully robbed the grieving family of their only tangible chance at securing a definitive scientific resolution. The tragic, irreversible loss of a replaceable microscopic trace evidence that was carelessly washed away or hopelessly contaminated essentially handed the unidentified killer a permanent, impenetrable shield of anonymity, ensuring that they would completely escape the devastating earthly consequences of their monstrous actions, while the shattered O family was cruelly condemned to endure a lifetime of agonizing, unanswered questions. The agonizing psychological burden carried by the original homicide detectives who passionately worked the flooded crime scene and frantically chased fading, contradictory witness statements through the dark, rainy streets of Honolulu is a profound, silent tragedy entirely hidden within the sterile, fading pages of the cold case files. These dedicated, seasoned investigators were ultimately forced to quietly surrender their badges and step into retirement, carrying the immense, crushing weight of their professional failure, heavily burdened by the terrifying realization that they were completely unable to identify the ruthless individual who exploited a severe winter storm to violently extinguish a beautiful young life. They handed over the massive, convoluted boxes of typewritten reports, blurry crime scene photographs, and deeply frustrating dead ends to an entirely new generation of law enforcement officers who unfortunately lack the deep, personal, emotional connection to the sheer, unadulterated terror that gripped the island population during those 10 agonizing days of desperate searching. This gradual, inevitable institutional detachment further solidifies the tragic reality that this case has slowly transitioned from a frantic, active manhunt into a somber historical archive where the vibrant, beautiful memory of the 19-year-old Kailua hairdresser is constantly at risk of being entirely eclipsed by the sensationalized, macabre details of her unsolved murder. It is precisely this insidious process of historical erosion that makes it an absolute, uncompromising moral imperative for us to fiercely, actively, and relentlessly preserve the true, unvarnished narrative of her existence, deliberately stripping away the dense, suffocating layers of speculative community lore regarding cunning police impersonators, hidden blue grill lights, and terrifying phantom serial killers. We must completely reject the overwhelming societal temptation to reduce her profound tragedy to a mere fascinating puzzle for amateur, armchair detectives, and instead rigorously center the profound, irreplaceable humanity she brought to the windward community. We must continually remember her not merely as the tragic subject of 150,000 desperate missing person flyers rapidly distributed across the panic-stricken island, but as the deeply beloved daughter, the fiercely loyal friend, and the highly talented, cheerful stylist who spent her days bringing absolute joy and warm, genuine conversation to the grateful clients sitting in her chair at the Susan Beer Salon. She was a young woman possessing a uniquely empathetic spirit, happily navigating the beautiful, complicated threshold of early adulthood, maintaining deep, loving relationships, and holding on to specific personal aspirations that were violently, mercilessly obliterated by a faceless, cowardly predator, completely devoid of basic human empathy. By continually honoring the radiant light of her 19 years rather than obsessively focusing on the terrifying, chaotic darkness of her final, unobserved moments, we actively, deny the unidentified killer the ultimate absolute victory of completely erasing her beautiful soul from the historical memory of the islands. The heavy, relentless winter rain that catastrophically flooded her abandoned 1976 Toyota and tragically washed away the fragile, microscopic clues on the steep, treacherous slopes of Mount Tantalus will forever serve as a powerful, devastating environmental metaphor for the unforgiving passage of time and the terrifying inherent fragility of the human condition. Time is a relentless, destructive natural force that continuously erodes the sharp edges of trauma, violently obscures the fragile pathways to the objective truth, and slowly, permanently buries the darkest secrets of the past under the immense, crushing weight of the passing decades. Yet despite the complete absolute absence of a judicial resolution, the fading hopes of a definitive technological breakthrough, and the immense agonizing silence that continues to emanate from the cold case archives, the heartbreaking narrative of Lisa O absolutely refuses to be entirely forgotten. Stubbornly persisting in the collective consciousness of Oahu as a poignant, enduring demand for ultimate accountability. Her tragic, unresolved story serves as a stark, uncompromising, and deeply terrifying reminder that behind every faded, forgotten missing person poster, behind every dusty, neglected cold case file gathering dust in a police warehouse, and behind every single sensationalized true crime broadcast, there is a real, deeply loved human being whose permanent violent absence continues to completely break the hearts of those left behind in the agonizing, silent aftermath. The terrifying spatial triangle formed by the warm, comfortable apartment in Makiki, the flooded, isolated shoulder of the road in Maunawili, and the remote, heavily overgrown natural ravine on the steep slopes of Mount Tantalus remains permanently etched into the psychological geography of the island, serving as a grim, unbreakable constellation of human tragedy that violently disrupted the peaceful illusion of paradise. The community continues to silently carry the immense invisible weight of this unresolved trauma, constantly scanning the darkening skies with a lingering sense of deeply ingrained paranoia whenever the heavy winter rain clouds begin to aggressively gather over the towering, jagged ridges of the Kula Mountains. They are permanently haunted by the terrifying realization that the monstrous individual who meticulously orchestrated this flawless abduction successfully blended back into the ordinary fabric of society, perhaps walking the very same sun-drenched beaches, driving the very same winding coastal highways, and living out the entirety of their natural life completely unburdened by the legal consequences of the horrific atrocity they committed on that blinding torrential night. This profound, agonizing lack of justice represents a gaping, festering wound in the moral fabric of the Hawaiian community, constantly challenging the fundamental comforting assumption that the truth will always eventually prevail and that the innocent will ultimately receive the absolute justice they so desperately deserve. As the passing years continue to relentlessly stretch into passing decades, the desperate, fragile hope for a miraculous scientific resolution heavily relies on the highly improbable possibility that a revolutionary new forensic technique might one day successfully extract a definitive hidden genetic profile from the heavily degraded, severely compromised physical evidence that barely survived the brutal exposure to the tropical elements. Alternatively, the community is forced to desperately cling to the faint possibility that an incredibly heavy, suffocating, guilty conscience might finally completely break decades of cowardly silence, prompting the aging perpetrator or an individual holding a dark, closely guarded secret to step forward into the unforgiving light of day and finally provide the shattered, grieving family with the definitive, absolute answers they have been so cruelly denied for over 40 years. The profound cultural impact of this unsolved mystery cannot be overstated, as it fundamentally shifted the paradigm of parental anxiety and communal trust across the entire Hawaiian archipelago, fundamentally altering the way families approach the simple concept of a young woman driving alone at night in inclement weather. The terrifying specter of the flashing blue grill light, deliberately used as a weapon of deception by the cunning predator, completely shattered the foundational civic trust that citizens instinctively place in the sworn symbols of law enforcement, creating a deep, pervasive psychological rift that The Honolulu Police Department had to desperately painstakingly work to repair through immediate sweeping administrative changes and strict permanent bans on concealed emergency lighting. Yet even these necessary reactive institutional measures offered absolutely no genuine comfort or tangible solace to the devastated parents who were forced to endure the apocalyptic emotional catastrophe of burying their completely innocent 19-year-old daughter without possessing a single definitive answer regarding the exact identity of the monster responsible for her horrific demise. The agonizing daily reality for the surviving family members involves constantly navigating a terrifying emotional minefield where every single passing anniversary of her disappearance, every subsequent birthday she was violently prevented from celebrating, and every quiet family gathering is heavily overshadowed by the dark, inescapable void of her absence and the relentless, agonizing torment of ambiguous loss. This specific devastating psychological condition traps the grieving loved ones in a perpetual state of emotional purgatory, preventing them from ever achieving any genuine semblance of closure or fundamental peace, because the final definitive chapter of her life remains completely unwritten. Forcefully leaving their imaginations to obsessively, endlessly construct horrifying, terrifying scenarios regarding her final unobserved moments on that dark, rain-swept highway. The sheer enduring cruelty of this unsolved status is a testament to the profound limitations of the human justice system when confronted with a perfect storm of severe environmental destruction, catastrophic early procedural errors, and the severe technological handicaps of a bygone era. It serves as a bleak, highly cautionary tale for modern forensic science, highlighting the absolute paramount importance of meticulous initial evidence preservation and the devastating irreversible consequences that occur when the fragile, microscopic truth is carelessly allowed to slip through the procedural cracks and wash away into the muddy tropical soil. The legacy of Lisa O must therefore actively transcend the grim, frustrating details of her unsolved murder, becoming instead a powerful, enduring symbol of the absolute necessity for relentless investigative perseverance and the fierce, unwavering protection of the victim's humanity in the face of sensationalized true crime media consumption. We owe it to her memory to completely reject the morbid fascination with the unknown killer and instead dedicate our collective focus entirely to honoring the beautiful, vibrant 19 years she spent gracing the Windward community with her radiant smile, her compassionate heart, and her undeniable, joyful presence. By refusing to let her simply fade into the sterile, dusty archives of forgotten local history, we actively keep her bright spirit alive, ensuring that her name continues to evoke profound love, deep respect, and an unyielding demand for truth rather than simply serving as a synonym for an unsolvable, terrifying island mystery. The relentless winds that continually sweep across the majestic peaks of Oahu will carry her story forward through the passing generations, a permanent, haunting melody of loss and a resilient, eternal plea for the absolute justice that was so violently stripped from her grasp on that fateful, stormy night in 1982.